All right, welcome everybody. Yeah, we're going to have yet another great late night chat.
Token of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
Welcome, everybody. I am so glad to be here with all of you tonight. We're going to have yet another great late night chat. So we're going to follow our normal format. First, I'll be giving the opening remarks. Then from there, we're going to do the roll call. And then from there, I will answer people's questions for the remainder of the night. So if you've got something you would like me to talk about in the second half of the show, please send a Rumble rant. You can Cash App me, Caleb Maupin 22. But the absolute best way to help us out is to go to buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. It's a great way to do it. John already sent a question. He'll be the first one answered. But you know, we're gonna just do a normal show tonight. Talk about some important events that are happening in the world. So yeah. If you would like to send a question for the second half of the show, I would urge you to sure do that thing. All right. As far as announcements, join the Center for Political Innovation. A lot of exciting things are happening. In June, I'm going to be in Los Angeles. At the end of June, I'm going to be in Minneapolis. We're going to have an event in New York City on July 2nd, all leading up to our national 7-day program, 7-day training program that we'll be doing in August. So we got a lot of exciting things going on. Our community is growing and we are organizing, and great stuff is happening. So join the Center for Political Innovation to be involved. We'll have more information on the upcoming workshops if you'd like to attend those. Get involved in our community. We are building an anti-imperialist movement here in America. So as I said before, if you've got something you'd like me to talk about in the second half of the show, go to buymeacoffee.com /Caleb Maupin and send me your question. You can also do a Rumble rant, Cash App, but the best way to send your question is go to Buy Me a Coffee. All right, folks, we're going to be talking about something very serious tonight that I think everyone should be concerned about, because Ranjeet Brar, who is a neurosurgeon in Britain. He is a leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist. He's a friend of the Center for Political Innovation. I have met him on one occasion. I actually met him at a World Youth Festival, but his sister I've met on a number of occasions, Jyoti. She's spoken at a number of CPI events, his father's work, great thinking anti-imperialist leader in Britain. His father's work is a huge influence on us. I mean, his father is just one of the main real anti-imperialists in Britain who's been consistent, who's refused to back down. He's now deceased. And Ranjeet is our friend. And I saw the news today. I was shocked to see that this morning, and I guess, it's, time difference. So it was quite some time ago. It was like the early hours of the morning over here, but it was early, just after morning today. Ranjeet Brar, the great anti-imperialist activist, was taken from his home to a jail in Britain. And they didn't accuse him of robbing anybody. They didn't accuse him of stealing anything. They arrested him for his speech, and they have charged him with being an anti-Semite, promoting hate speech against Jews because of his anti-Israel speech. And this isn't the first time he's been arrested. He was arrested once before because of a pamphlet that he had, that his organization, the Communist Party of Great Britain, they had a pamphlet. Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninists, had a pamphlet on their literature table about Zionism, Zionism and how awful it is. And it had a Star of David with a swastika in the middle of it. And he was arrested for that. And they tried to charge him with a crime. Ultimately, nothing came of it, but he spent some time in jail. He was dragged out of his house. It was pretty awful. And now it seems they've decided to come after him again. And so he was taken to jail. Now I understand he has been released, thank God. But right now his license as a doctor has been suspended. And again, they're not accusing him of any crime. They're just accusing him of his speech. That basically he hurt the feelings of Zionists with a speech that he gave in London a couple days ago in front of the U.S. Embassy. The U.S. Embassy in London, there was a protest, and Ranjeet was there representing the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, and he gave a speech, and this speech was video recorded. A bunch of Zionists tweeted this speech everywhere and shared the speech all over the internet, said, oh, it's such a horrible speech. It's so offensive. And so it looks like they called up the cops, and the cops dragged him out of his home. This is a father. He's got children. This is a medical doctor, right? This guy's not some, thug and criminal. This guy's a doctor who works in the National Health Care System Service of Britain, the NHS. He's in, he's just an all-around amazing individual who's an anti-imperialist, and he gave a speech. And because this speech hurt the feelings of Zionists and they raised a ruckus on the internet, they arranged for the police to drag him from his home. And now he's facing criminal charges. And for at least the next 2 weeks, he's not going to be able to practice medicine. Right? I mean, this guy could be helping people. In Britain, they talk about sometimes there's delay in getting surgeries, et cetera. There's waiting lists. I mean, he could be performing surgery on people. People won't get medical care. People who need medical care won't get it because on his time off, he exercised his right to freedom of speech, and he went to the U.S. Embassy and joined a protest against Zionism. And at that protest, he gave a speech, and some Zionists videoed it, and now he's facing criminal charges. Now he's out of jail, thank goodness. It's a great relief that he is no longer in jail. That's at least something. But at the same time that he's no longer in jail, he is still facing these charges. This is absolutely outrageous. And so, of course, when I heard about this, I've met Ranjeet once, met his sister a number of times. I really appreciate a lot of their work as anti-imperialists. I decided that what we needed to do was obviously do everything we can as CPI to speak up on their behalf, to support them. And then I found out it was because of this speech that he gave. So I actually decided I would watch the speech, and I watched the speech. It was an epic, absolutely amazing speech. It was a tremendous, tremendous speech that he gave. It was amazing. I mean, it was really, I have heard many anti-Israel, pro-Iran, pro-working class, anti-imperialist speeches in my life. This was probably one of the best speeches I've ever heard. And I mean, it makes sense why they would want to arrest him for it, because this speech was absolutely epic. So I'm going to play that speech on here in a second. I'm waiting for people to pile in, right? We just started and people are piling in. But this speech that he gave, I've got to tell you, I have heard few speeches in my life that, I mean, he got all the good points in. He talked about Iran. He talked about Israel and Zionism. He talked about the Epstein class. He talked about financiers and monopolist bankers. And it's just an absolutely epic speech that he gave. It's not too long. Very concise, to the point. It's an amazing anti-imperialist speech that he gave. And they dragged him from his home and put him in prison for this speech. And I mean, it's a really amazing speech. So I'm going to show it here in a second. But CPI, we're always there for people who are under attack. We are always there for people who are being targeted for their anti-imperialist work. And I want to say right now, before we show the speech, because it was just such an epic speech, one of the biggest problems in anti-imperialism right now is that there is a lack of solidarity, right? The People's Democratic Uhuru movement was a Pan-Africanist socialist group in America, and they were targeted in a similar way. It wasn't for their speech about Israel. It was for their speech about Russia, about Ukraine. They opposed Ukraine. They took Russia's side in the Ukraine conflict, and they were charged with being foreign agents for their speech. And, nobody did anything about it except CPI. CPI, we organized an event at the United Nations. CPI, we raised their case in Russia. We raised their case at all kinds of protests and stuff, but none of these people cared, right? Jimmy Dore did a great job raising the case. Max Blumenthal talked about the case. Tara Reid, we introduced her to the case, and Tucker Carlson ended up featuring them. But all these people who were on the internet, oh, look at me, look, I'm so anti-imperialist. They didn't do anything about it. And in fact, one of these organizations that has a lot of resources and a lot of funding, one of their leaders is a millionaire. One of their people told me on the phone that they were happy that Uhuru got raided because they saw them as competition. It was really unbelievable. He basically said he was happy about it, right? And that organization, you should know who I'm talking about. I try not to refer to them directly, but they're a vile group of people. And they actually celebrated the prosecution of the Uhuru movement and told me on the phone at one point when we were trying to have some dialogue so they would stop harassing us. They told me on the phone they were happy that the Uhuru movement was being prosecuted. So there's no solidarity anymore. Right. And this is a big problem because people in the anti-imperialist movement, it's all just a big competition. And so if somebody's being smeared and somebody's being targeted who has a similar message to you, that's great because then more people will watch you. And every time someone accomplishes something good for anti-imperialism, right? People don't celebrate it. They say, oh, that jerk, it should be me. I'm the good one. Right. And it is a big fucking problem. It is a really, really big problem. And right now, they have dragged an important anti-imperialist leader from Britain out of his home for an amazing anti-imperialist speech that he gave. And right now, we all need to raise from the heavens that this is not okay. Right. And I don't care, if you think it'll take away from your view count. I don't care if he's wrong about North Korea in 1942. I don't care if you don't agree with him about the transgender. They're trying to make it illegal to be pro-Palestine in Britain. They're trying to make it illegal to be pro-Russia in America. They're trying to make it illegal to be pro-Iran in Britain. We got to do something about this. We've got to do something about this. And we've spoken up around different cases like this, right? Tucker Carlson looks like he's under FBI investigation right now. We have spoken up about that. The Unification Church has been outlawed in Japan. The government of Japan forcibly dissolved a church because that church is friendly to North Korea. And we have spoken up for them. And the government of South Korea imprisoned their leader. And we have spoken up about that case as well. When we see people who do anti-imperialist work and are important anti-imperialists being targeted, we speak up for them. And, and that even if they have been nasty to us, right? PSL, there is some noise that Congress might go after them. Now, I'll believe it when I see it. I don't think anything's going to happen to them. But there's some noise, like Congress might go after the PSL, and we would defend PSL on principle, right? And I said that in my speech to the CPI convention last year. We would defend them as a matter of principle, right? That you cannot allow a precedent to be set where they can throw you in jail for being an anti-imperialist. That cannot be tolerated. It simply cannot be tolerated. and you got to do something about it. And that's why we took the Uhuru case very, very seriously. And we take what's happening now to Ranjeet Brar very, very seriously. Last time they were arrested, we spoke up and nothing came of it. But now it's happened again. It's a really serious problem, and there's not any solidarity. And that's the problem. Coming out of the 1960s generation, people understood that you have to oppose this. When the FBI raided the homes of the Freedom Road Socialist Organization in 2010, right? We had a national day of action against it in Cleveland, and all these old communists showed up from different groups because they knew about COINTELPRO and they knew what the FBI had done to the anti-war movement and to the Black Panthers. And, you know, there were all kinds of people who came to that protest and protested the FBI office in Cleveland against the raids on the Freedom Road Socialist Organization. I was one of them. You know, and people got it. People don't get it now. And you know, when they came for Uhuru, I mean, shout out to Due Dissidents. They did great work supporting them. Shout out to Garland Nixon. He did great work. Shout out to, you know, Scott Ritter, who attended one of their court proceedings along with us. You know, but so many people either did nothing at all, which was a lot of them, or there were some who put out one statement. Oh, we did something. And that organization that told me they were happy they were being prosecuted on the phone, you know, that organization, they said, oh, we didn't leave them out to dry. We made a tweet about it. Yeah, we made a tweet about it. You know, unbelievable. So most communist groups put out one little tweet or one little statement and then did nothing. And they were literally trying to outlaw support for Russia in America. And now we have the leader of the Communist Party of Great Britain, Marxist-Leninist, their general secretary, gave a great epic speech about Iran at a recent protest. They dragged him out of his home, took him to jail, suspended his medical license. He's facing prison time, possibly, for giving a speech supporting Iran. This is something that needs to be taken seriously. It needs to be, you know, from the heavens, we need to be supporting them. This is a really, really, really big deal. This is a really, 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 really big deal. And you can tell who the true people are and who the phonies are. You know, you can tell who the serious ones are and who the phonies are, because the phonies won't do anything about this. But anyone who's genuinely anti-imperialist, no matter what they think or whatever issues they have with this group and their political line, anyone who's really anti-imperialist will stand with them right now. This is so dangerous. This is so dangerous what's happening right now, that they would imprison, they would go after a doctor for giving a speech. And, you know, and I am so sick and tired of internet grifters who don't care. They sound like me and they sound like Ranjeet Brar, but they don't care. And they're just trying to grift money, and they have absolutely no solidarity. And an injury to one is an injury to all. If they come for one of us, they need to have to deal with all of us. Solidarity. But for people for whom this is all just a big internet competition, right? There is no solidarity. We need to have absolute solidarity with Ranjeet Brar. They dragged him out of his home, took him to jail, suspended his medical license because he gave an amazing anti-imperialist speech. That's not okay. It's got to be opposed, right? It should not be a crime to stand with Iran and with the Palestinians in Britain. One should be able to exercise their free speech and make a statement. And, you know, and just like with Uhuru, but the phonies, the internet grifters, the people who are just building an internet brand, the people who all they care about is how many likes and clicks they get, the people who don't do any real activism, but somehow get boosted by Israel, right? Why would we let our movement be led by somebody who Israel literally tweeted April Fool's jokes about them? Are you stupid? Are you fucking stupid? If you think that this person who didn't do anything for Uhuru, even though his group has loads of money, they didn't do anything for Uhuru. One of their people told me over the phone that they were happy that Uhuru was being prosecuted. You know, and their leader, one of their leaders, I wouldn't even call him a leader, one of the internet grifters associated with him, Israel literally tweeted out an April Fool's joke about him. And people still can't understand that this guy's a fraud, right? And he did nothing for Uhuru, absolutely nothing for Uhuru. And I doubt he'll do anything to support Ranjeet. Maybe after I make noise like this, right? They tend to follow everything I do closely and try to do their own version of it. But I'm telling you, there are frauds out there, and real people that are serious about anti-imperialism, when they drag somebody to jail for giving an anti-imperialist speech, they do something about it. They do something about it. They speak up. They attend their court dates. They raise their case at international events. They march in the streets to support them. That is what real anti-imperialists do. And frauds get on the internet and try to be cool on the internet and talk shit about people's personal lives and are competitive assholes, right? That's the difference. If people are speaking up for Ranjeet right now, they're for real. If people are not speaking up for Ranjeet right now, they're frauds. If people spoke up for the Uhuru movement, they're real. If people did nothing for the Uhuru movement, they're frauds. They are frauds. And I don't want to get too fired up about this, but I know Ranjeet. I know Ranjeet's family. I mean, his father is somebody who I spent years studying, as somebody I really looked up to, and this is really, really dangerous. Oh, but I want to be internet famous. I'm telling you, we don't need a podcast. We need a real movement. And Ranjeet went to a real protest with a real organization and spoke up with his real voice, risked his career, and they are trying to imprison him for giving an amazing speech. And this shall not pass. This must be opposed. And I'm getting fired up about this because, it would be one thing. People just didn't like me or just didn't like Ranjeet. Yeah, that would be one thing. You don't have to like me. You don't have to like Ranjeet. You don't have to like anybody. You don't have to like the Uhuru movement. But when people are actively supporting the government going after other people just because they want to be internet famous, I want people to watch me, not them, right? It's unacceptable. It's absolutely unacceptable. An injury to one is an injury to all. If they come for one of us, they should have to deal with all of us. Ranjeet Brar was dragged out of his home for giving this amazing speech. I'm going to put it on here in a second. Just waiting for people to pile in. I want everyone to see the speech. I don't want people to come in an hour late and wonder, hey, what's he talking about? I want you to see how amazing this speech is. This speech sounds like a CPI speech, right? And I know, his group and our group don't see eye to eye on a lot of things, actually. Our views have kind of, we're not exactly, we were much closer 2 or 3 years ago in our perspective. We've diverged a little bit. Doesn't matter, right? And this speech, this speech was epic. I couldn't have put it better myself. I don't think there's a single thing he said in his speech that I disagree with. And I think it's exactly what people need to hear right now. And it was like a torpedo, right? Words matter. Words matter, right? There's this culture, let's be real about this, okay? For a minute, right? If you ever criticize the Party for Socialism and Liberation, their response is, well, we actually do something, right? And there's this culture that says that words don't matter. All that matters is activism. And, there's some truth in that. There's a lot of people that are just on the internet doing podcasts and don't talk about anything. There's a lot of people who write a lot of pamphlets, but they don't ever do outreach. They never build. They don't have any base, so there's something to that. But words are really important. And again, if Ranjeet had said what he said on a podcast, they wouldn't have arrested him. If he'd said what he said on a blog, they wouldn't have arrested him. He went into the streets of London, was surrounded by other pro-Palestine, pro-Iran people, and all kinds of people were walking by, and they heard this truth torpedo, this epic speech, this epic anti-imperialist message. And it wasn't people that were looking for this and it was in their internet bubble. It wasn't people that know who he is. And no, people who had nothing to do with this, people that were just going about their day as if there's not a huge war going on, as if Iranian children are not being bombed, heard this epic speech by Ranjeet Brar. And it was a truth torpedo. And, the Zionists that were filming this rally, They were furious about it because it hit home. It was a powerful, powerful speech that spoke to so much truth. And they were so upset that Ranjeet told this truth on the streets of London in front of the US Embassy that they called up the police and they had the police drag him out of his home for giving this epic anti-imperialist speech. You've got to hear the speech. You have got to hear the speech. So please, it's not a very long speech, and it shouldn't be. When you're speaking like this, you can't go on for a long time, right? It's concise. It's to the point. It's brilliant anti-imperialist agitation. We need speeches like this all across America. I want a speech like this to be delivered in every small town, every village, every street corner in Chicago, in Milwaukee, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and in Peoria, Illinois, and Jasper Junction, West Virginia, and I don't know, no matter where it is, I want people to hear this kind of thing. This is exactly what Americans need to hear more than anything. This is what Americans need to hear, and that's why they arrested him for it. I mean, he said it in Britain. Britons need to hear it too, right? British folks, Scots, and Londoners, and English people, and Welsh people, and they all need to hear this speech. So I'm going to put the speech on, right? It's an absolutely amazing speech, and I want all of you to be thinking about what version of this speech could I give to my neighbors? What version of this speech could I give to my classmates at the university? What version of this speech could I give to my coworkers at my job? What version of this speech could I tell my family members, or the people in my neighborhood, or the people I ride the bus with to work, or the people at my workout class, or the people at my church? Everyone in the West, in Britain, in America, needs to hear words like this. This is what people need to be hearing, and that's why they arrested him for it. That's why they arrested him for it. They didn't arrest some dude bro who talks about, yeah, man, I like work out and stuff, and America's already communist, but they're Trotskyist, and I don't know what that means, but I'm internet famous. That's not who they arrested. They arrested this guy for saying what people need to hear. And that is what people need to hear, right? That is what people need to hear. So I'm going to put it on. But I want you to hear this. And I want you to be thinking about how you can tell this to your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers. This is the speech they dragged Ranjeet Brar to prison, to jail for, and suspended his medical license for giving. Ladies and gentlemen, Ranjeet Brar.
Victory to Iran. Victory to Iran. I don't know why you wouldn't say it. Victory to Iran. They are rewriting the map of the Middle East. They are ejecting the US imperialists from the whole region. I can't agree more with the last speaker who said this is the end of Sykes-Picot. I thought it at the beginning of the Palestinian uprising we would see a wider war. At the end of the 8-Day War, I was one of those people who wanted Iranian not to stop striking Israel. Why should we be afraid to say it? Israel, its genocidal settler colonial entity, has no right to existence. It needs to be wiped off the face of the map and replaced with the word Palestine in its entirety. I want to see the Lebanese resistance triumph. I want to see the Yemeni resistance triumph. I want to see the fall of the imperialist stooge regimes. And when our government and our city of London lose control over these incredible sources of wealth, because that's what they want. Whatever they say, girls' school, girls' education, Islamic regime, democracy, is bullshit. Excuse my language, it's nonsense. It's pure nonsense. They want the oil, but they can't say it. They want the oil. Anglo-Persian oil, 1908, they discovered oil in Iran. They paid 100,000 to the Shah at the time and they just looted it. That's what they want. They want the unbridled wealth of the world in their hands, and they can use that wealth against the working people of Britain, and all countries will become their slaves. They'll become their slaves. They want that system back. They're so upset. They cannot give up. This Epstein class means that the class of financiers who are the enemies of humanity, they are fighting this war. They are running this war. They are the enemies of the British workers as they are of the Iranian workers. We must find a way to turn out this Labour government, to break their link with the British working class, and to forge a resistance movement worthy of its name, so we can say to our brothers and sisters in Iran, truly we stand in solidarity with them. And the way to demonstrate it will be to get all US bases out of this country. All US troops out of this country. To close the Israeli embassy. to close the US embassy and eject these parasites from our country, and to finally have a reckoning with the real parasites in this country. Not the immigrants who come penniless, looking for work, looking for jobs. The real parasites in this country are the financiers in the city of London who seek to enslave us all and have enmeshed the world in a system of global slavery. Iranians are our brothers. We wish them love and solidarity. We're inspired by their strength in the face of this brutal terroristic attack upon them. We stand with them and we will pledge to do more. We will build a movement worthy of my big words. Big words, I admit, I cannot meet them with deeds. I cannot throw these people out of our country, but we must set the aim. We must win the working people to these aims, and a great deal can be achieved. It's a pleasure to be with you here today, a pleasure and an honor on this terrible occasion to see such fine and honorable people standing against the system of tyranny. You are the real people who stand for freedom in this world, and I salute you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Yes, that was amazing. That was utterly amazing. He said that the real parasites are the financiers, the Epstein class. He said that Zionism is the enemy of all humanity. He said that they should eject the Israeli embassy. They eject the U.S. embassy from Britain. He said that the enemy of the British workers and the enemy of the Iranians and the enemy of the Palestinians are the same. He said exactly what everyone needs to hear right now. Our real enemy is at home. Our enemy is an international financial system, Wall Street and London, gripping the world and keeping the world as their slaves. And that when countries break out of that system, the Yemeni resistance, the Palestinian resistance, the Iranian Islamic Republic, when countries break out of that system, they are our allies against globalism, imperialism. That was an absolutely epic speech. And that is what they dragged him out of jail, dragged him to jail, out of bed, into jail for giving. And they want it to be illegal to talk that way. He said, victory to Iran, that Iran and the Iranian people have the right to defend themselves. Now, there was one part of the speech that you might not be familiar with, and that's okay. And that's he referenced the Sykes-Picot Agreement. Do people know about that? A lot of people don't, right? If you're somebody in the chat who knows about it, good for you, but it's not common knowledge. I didn't know about it until I was in college, right? Why the Middle East? Let's just talk about this. So, it's important to know what the Sykes-Picot Agreement is, and I will pull it up. But the Sykes-Picot Agreement, it drew up the borders of the Middle East. So during World War I, you had the Russian Revolution, and the Bolsheviks, they were kind of like Julian Assange. And one thing that they did is when the Bolsheviks took power, they did a huge info drop, a huge WikiLeaks. They revealed all the secret treaties that were held by the Tsar's government, right? And as World War I was still going on, Russia dropped out of World War I, and then the Bolsheviks revealed all kinds of secret communications between the Russians and the British, between the French and the Germans, and it was really, really powerful. And one of the things that they revealed was a treaty called the Sykes-Picot Agreement. During World War I, the Allied countries drew the map of the Middle East, right? And this is a very, very, very important thing. But this is what they did. This is what they drew, right? During World War I, the Ottoman Empire of Turkey controlled the Middle East region. And at that point, the British were planning to defeat the Ottoman Empire. And so they decided, what are the new borders going to be? And they drew up the borders of the Middle East. And they drew up the borders of Iraq. And they drew up the borders of Syria. And they gave it to the French, right? And they drew up Palestine. And after World War I, you had the Balfour Declaration. And the borders of the modern Middle East were drawn up by the colonizers, right? There is one Arab people. And this is one thing I have learned from Arabs, right? Arabs. The Iranians are not Arabs, by the way. They're Persians, right? But the Arab people, there's one Arab nationality. There's not a Saudi people. There's not a Jordanian people. There's not a Palestinian people exactly. I mean, there's people that lived in the land of Palestine, but there's one Arab nation. Arabs are Arabs. They speak Arabic and they have one nationality. And these borders were drawn up when the imperialists came and seized their land and divided among themselves parts of it. And they created Syria so that the French could have their chunk of it. And they drew Iraq so that the British puppet king of Iraq could have his part of it. And they drew Saudi Arabia because the House of Saud, which is a puppet of the British, this sultanate that the British gave guns to, that believed in the Wahhabi interpretation of Islam. The British had used them as puppets, right? The Sauds, the House of Saud, and they gave them a big chunk of the Middle East as well, right? And the borders of the Middle East were drawn up by the imperialists, and they're not real. And the Arab people have been divided so they could be oppressed and colonized. And he's saying that this is the end of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And the British Mandate of Palestine, which eventually became, the Israel after 1948, was drawn up, right? You had Palestine was there. And then the British had the Balfour Declaration, and they started sending Jewish people there in big numbers. And the Rothschilds and Theodore Herzl started bringing Jewish people there in big numbers. And those Jewish folks were not very nice to the Arabs. They would fight for British oil companies, and they would defend oil pipelines, the Jewish settlers that came in. So the Arabs revolted against the Jewish settlers that came in to Palestine in 1936. So the British military was sent to the British Mandate of Palestine in 1936 to put down the Arab riots against the Zionist settlers that were kidnapping, local Arab people and killing them and cutting off their hands and doing, awful things to the Arab population. And then after World War II, the United Nations, led by Harry Truman, created Israel. And Israel is a result of the British Mandate of Palestine. And it's a result of the Sykes-Picot Agreement. And if it wasn't for this phony treaty in which the imperialists drew all these phony borders, none of these borders would be there, right? And that the borders of the Middle East were created by imperialism for imperialist aims. And they picked certain families and gave them sultanates and rule. And the struggle of the Arab people has largely been a struggle to repudiate those borders. And the goal of the Ba'ath movement and the Ba'athist Arab socialist movement and Arab socialism, Abdel Nasser in Egypt and Saddam Hussein in Iraq and the Assad, Hafez Assad and Bashar Assad in Syria and Gaddafi, their goal was to get rid of these borders and have a united Arab republic of one nation for all the Arab peoples. And that was the Arab socialist movement. That was largely what Arab nationalism was fighting for. And so Ranjeet is there saying that basically this is the end of these borders, right? That these borders that have been imposed, involved the Mandate of Palestine, eventual creation of Israel. This is over, right? The Sykes-Picot Agreement is over, and there's going to be a new Middle East with new borders coming out of this conflict. And I think he's probably right. It's wild, though. It's going to be, that means there's a lot, I would like to see a de-escalation of the conflict. But if we're going to see, if that's basically what has to happen here, that Israel and the United States are getting so vicious that that there's going to be no way to end this without completely redrawing these borders. That's how it's going to be. I want to say this, right? This phrase "wiped off the map." It is so annoying to me that, oh my God, wiped off the map. That means killed them all, folks. You ever heard of Rhodesia? There was a country called Rhodesia, and Rhodesia was a country named after a British colonizer named Cecil Rhodes. And the borders of Rhodesia were drawn by the British Empire. And eventually they got independence, but they were still run by all these white British settlers. And they had apartheid conditions, and the black people were slaves. And all the land was owned by the white British colonizers, including a billionaire named Ian Smith, who was their president. That was called Rhodesia. And you know what happened in the 1980s? Led by Robert Mugabe, with guns from China and guns from the Soviet Union, the Zimbabwe African National Union, ZANU, led by Robert Mugabe, the Zimbabwe African National Union Patriotic Front, they came together and they led a rebellion, an uprising. And that uprising wiped Rhodesia off the map. Was that a bad thing? And now, all over Zimbabwe, the new country that was created after Rhodesia was wiped off the map, they have the highest literacy rate in Africa. They have diamond mines. China cooperates with the government there. They have a highway that goes to Victoria Falls and a beautiful hotel by the Victoria Falls, one of the the natural wonders of the world. Now it can be seen. There's a road leading to it, and thousands of black people that were slaves before now have their own farms. Right, black people. They've redistributed their land. Was that a bad thing to wipe Rhodesia off the map? Was that genocide to wipe Rhodesia off the map? No. Now, some of the white farmers have lost their land, not all of them, but some. Some of the white farmers have lost their land, and the British government has a whole program where they give them money and they've repatriated them. And yes, some of those white farmers have lost out and had to move to Britain or whatnot. But largely, I mean, there's a lot of white people in the government of Zimbabwe. That's a little known fact, but a lot of the government employees are white people, and Zimbabwe, the population overall has benefited very, very significantly from the redistribution of land, from the nationalization of diamond mines, et cetera, right? And, China is there investing, and yeah, there's still a lot of poor people there, but they've wiped out illiteracy and they've done great things. Zimbabwe, as an anti-imperialist government aligned with North Korea, aligned with China, aligned with Russia, they've achieved some good things, right? There's still, there's still difficulty there, and there's corruption, and I'm not saying there's not issues, but was it a horrendous crime against humanity that Rhodesia was wiped off the map? No, it was not. No, it wasn't. And I'll tell you about another country. You ever heard of the Dutch East Indies? The Dutch East Indies. A lot of people don't know about the Dutch East Indies. The Dutch East Indies, right? That was a country that used to exist, right? Called the Dutch East Indies. And it was a country where, the Netherlands, the Dutch colonized a bunch of islands in the Pacific. And the people there were exploited and horrendously treated. And, there was, women were forced into sexual slavery, and there was torture, and it was pretty awful what the Dutch East Indies did. But after World War II, on August 17th, 1945, the Dutch East Indies was wiped off the map. And it's now called Indonesia. Now, does Indonesia have problems? Sure, right? Muslims and Christians don't get along. Ethnic Chinese people are persecuted. There's issues there. But was wiping the Dutch East Indies off the map a bad thing? Was it just this horrendous genocide of the Dutch East Indiers? No, it was a colonial settler state that was created by the Netherlands Empire, was replaced with a government that to some degree or other represented the people there. Now, in the 1960s, they had an amazing president who is one of the most beloved figures in the country. And he's the guy who invented this flower. The president of Indonesia in the 1960s was Sukarno, right? And he was a personal friend of Kim Il-sung. And he was a socialist, a Marxist, and he worked with China and he worked with the Soviet Union, and he was doing amazing things. And in 1965, the CIA overthrew the government of Indonesia, and it was a horrendous coup. And it was a crime against humanity what was done in Indonesia in 1965. The CIA provided The government of Indonesia, the military overthrew the government. Generals that had been trained by the United States violently overthrew the government, established a military dictatorship, and then the CIA provided the government of Indonesia with a list of all the members of the Communist Party of Indonesia, and they started rounding them all up and executing them and slaughtering them in mass. And then they just started killing the entire neighborhoods that these communists lived in. And then they just started killing the entire ethnic group, and they just committed genocide against ethnically Chinese people in Indonesia. 1965, and it kept going. 1966, 1967, they just committed genocide in Indonesia against ethnically Chinese people. And then later there was an island called East Timor, right? And then they committed genocide in East Timor and killed tens of thousands of people, and just slaughtered the entire island of East Timor. All of this was going on. This is Holocaust level crimes that you never hear about, right? You never hear about what was done in Indonesia to the ethnically Chinese people. And, one of the most outrageous things is, who was living in Indonesia while all of this was going on? Somebody named Barack Hussein Obama. Yeah, that's Barack Hussein Obama. And that's Obama's mama, Ann Dunham. And that's Lolo Soetoro, who was Barack Hussein Obama's stepdad, who was a general, a leader of the Indonesian military, who carried out this genocide. And little Barack was living in the house with Ann Dunham, his mother, and Lolo Soetoro. And Lolo Soetoro was going out every day with the Indonesian military to rape and plunder and torture and, and kill communists. And Ann Dunham, Obama's mother, was doing research with the Ford Foundation, right? The Ford Foundation was paying her to do research in Indonesia. What was that? I wonder what that was. I don't know. Who knows what that was about? Sounds a little CIA intelligence, probably, right? The U.S. government is backing the military to slaughter entire peoples, and Ann Dunham is going from village to village in Indonesia doing research. But this is Ann Dunham, and little Barack Obama was living in the household, with Ann Dunham and with Lolo Soetoro. So the guy who was our president for 8 years was directly involved in a genocide that happened in Indonesia, and we don't know anything about it. But was it a good thing that the Dutch East Indies was wiped off the map? Yes. Was it a good thing that Rhodesia was wiped off the map? Yes. And so why is it that if you say you want Israel, a settler state created by the British Empire, created by the United Nations, that displaced the Arab people, if you say that you want that state to go away, you want it wiped off the map, why does that mean you want to kill all the Jews? They didn't kill all the white people in Rhodesia. They didn't kill all the Netherlanders in the Dutch East Indies, in Indonesia, right? I mean, why is there such a hyperbole about this phrase? Many people in the world, don't recognize Israel, right? It's not just Iran, right? It's almost all the Arab world, right? Other than a couple countries in the Arab world, right? There's a couple because the Abraham Accords, I think, Morocco and United Arab Emirates recognize Israel. But other than that, all the Muslim countries of the world don't recognize the state of Israel. They say, we don't believe that Israel is a legitimate country, that it has a right to exist. We don't recognize the idea of a Jewish state on Arab land. We don't recognize that. So if you don't, if all of Iran, if all of Saudi Arabia, all of Jordan, all of Qatar, all of Egypt, they all don't recognize a country, why is it such a bad thing to say, I don't think that country should be on the map? I would like to see. I mean, it's not a really inflammatory, offensive thing to say. To say you want Israel, quote unquote, wiped off the map. It's not advocating genocide. It's not advocating mass murder of Jewish people. It's not denying the Holocaust. It's not even racism. You're just rejecting Zionism, the political movement that advocates the creation of a Jewish state is called Zionism. And if you oppose Zionism, that means you reject the idea of a Jewish state. So why is it that simply saying, I don't agree with Zionism, I do not believe that there should be a Jewish state, why is that such an awful thing to say? Why is that treated like a criminal thing to say? Right? It's a position, right? For example, right? Many Black Americans, not a majority, I don't think, but many Black Americans do want an independent Black country, right? The Republic of New Africa, it was created, right? It was a movement for an independent Black republic. The Communist Party called for the creation of the Black Belt South. The Nation of Islam called for an independent Black republic. Black nationalists in America, the Nation of Islam, the Black Panthers have called for an independent, a Black republic in the Black Belt regions of the South. That's where the Black population of America is still to this day the most highly concentrated. My position on that has always been I would be for it if the Black community wanted it. But as a white person, it is not my responsibility to go around advocating that because it comes across like segregation. If I went around saying, hey, Blacks, you should have your own country, that sounds like I'm, putting them in the back of the bus or something. So if a group of Black people was out there forming a movement to create their own country, I would support it. However, right now it's a minority among the Black community, and I speak up for that minority's right to say what they say. And, and there are different positions. For example, the Uhuru movement, they don't advocate the Black Belt, right? They are in favor of all the African people being one nation. And they are in favor of what they call African internationalism, but they don't take the Black Belt position. But I'm in favor of Black people's right to advocate that. But I don't necessarily think that's what should be done for them. Right? I mean, if they wanted that, they would have the right to do it. But Black people also have the right to integrate and be part of white society. And I also will fight for Black people's right to be part of white America as well, and to have jobs and to be part and not experience discrimination. Right? But would I be a racist? Would I be an evil person if I said, you know what, I don't think there should be a separate Black republic? No, that would just be a political position. Right? Now, I personally think that Black people have the right to that if they want it, but largely they don't as an oppressed nation. But that's just a position, right? I mean, advocating or not advocating the creation of a state, that is just a position. So, when it comes to the question of a Jewish state in Palestine, I'm against it. And I think I should be allowed to be against it. It is my right as an American, as someone in favor of freedom of speech, is my right to look into geopolitics, to look into history and say, you know what? The idea of creating a Jewish state in Palestine, bad idea. I'm against it. That is my right. And that's when someone says they want to wipe Israel off the map, that's all they're saying. They're saying, I don't agree with this political movement called Zionism, and I don't believe that there should be a Jewish state created in the land of Palestine. What is wrong with saying that? There is absolutely nothing wrong with saying that. That is your right. You should be free to say that. Just like you should be free to say, I don't want to create a Black republic in the Black Belt. Just like you should be free to say, you know what? I think Saskatchewan should stay part of Canada. I don't want Saskatchewan to break away from Canada and join the United States. You know that? There's a bunch of people in Saskatchewan that want it to be part of America. Western Canada. In Ontario, where most of the Canadian population is concentrated, they don't want to be part of America. But if you go to Western Canada, there's a bunch of people in Saskatchewan that are like, we have guns and we don't want to be Canucks. We want to be Americans. We like Trump. And, so if they want to do that, if the Western Canadians want to do that, they have the right to do it. But if you ask me, Caleb, does Saskatchewan have the right to statehood? I could say no, and that is my right. And the people in Saskatchewan can say no, and people in Ontario can say no, and people in America, like just having an opinion about what states should exist and what states shouldn't exist shouldn't be a crime. It absolutely should not be a crime. And the way that Zionism, and yes, I've seen the videos. I mean, I don't know if you've looked into this whole thing about deed theft, about, Zionists are literally stealing the homes of Black people in New York City. You know, and there's been protests about this. And I mean, I'm not going to get into the details of that issue here tonight, but look at the details. Our friend Lisa Davis, who CPI honored at our banquet or our event that we had in New Jersey on January 11th, she is very heavily involved in protesting around that as part of the Black is Back coalition, as a good friend of the Uhuru movement. It's pretty intense what is happening. I mean, it is absolutely crazy. And you know, now Ranjeet, our friend, has been dragged to jail because of the fact that he, you know, he said, God forbid, he said in his speech, Israel should be wiped off the map. It should be the end of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and they have made that a crime in Britain. You know, it is absolutely crazy, absolutely crazy what's going on, and we have got to rally loudly as possible in support of Ranjeet Brar and against this prosecution, just like we did around the Uhuru case, just like we have done in support of Tucker Carlson, in support of you know, the Unification Church as they face being outlawed in Japan, as Dr. Hak Jahan is persecuted in South Korea. Anywhere people are being persecuted for their right to have illiberal, anti-imperialist views, we got to speak up and support them. We got to speak up and support them because if they can do it to one of us, they can do it to all of us. And that needs to be common sense. Once again, it needs to be understood that this is what they're doing to Ranjeet right now, what they did to him today, and what he's now facing with these criminal charges. This is a threat. This is a danger, a real danger to all of us living in the so-called collective West, whether it's France, Germany, Australia, Canada. All of us are threatened by what they are doing to Ranjeet. It is a threat to all of us, and all of us must rally in Ranjeet's defense. And I don't care. I don't give a hoot what you think about every minutia of every issue that their party has ever commented on. Their party is pretty awesome. Okay. Their party was pro-Gaddafi, right? And actually, Jyoti Brar met Gaddafi, right? Did you know that? She actually went to Libya, and as a communist party, they had a good relationship with Libya's government. And Jyoti Brar is actually, you know, she's one of the people who was able to actually meet. She was in the same room as Gaddafi at one point. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. And they've done work for Gaza. They've done work for, you know, they're wonderful people in so many ways. And when it comes to Ukraine and Russia, they support Russia. When it comes to Iran, they stand with the Islamic Republic against the imperialists. They say victory to Iran. They are an absolutely tremendous group in many, many ways. And whatever disagreements exist, they don't matter. They just don't matter, right? Just like when they went after the Uhuru movement, whatever differences there are between CPI's political line and Uhuru's political line doesn't matter, right? And we have got to stand with Ranjeet Brar. We got to do everything we can to raise his case as loudly as we possibly can. We've got to find a way to get it into public attention, just like we did with the Uhuru case. And we have got to be the American wing of the movement to get all the charges against Ranjeet dropped and to get solidified in writing their right to say what they say about Iran, about Palestine, or about any other country. And that is our responsibility. An injury to one is an injury to all. And I am adamant about that. And that's what real organizers do. And that we got to get past this idea that it's all a big competition. Oh, I like this influencer. I like that influencer. None of us are going to be able to do this if they start dragging us all to jail. Like, you know, seriously, think about it. Think about it. Now, there's a couple other things I wanted to talk about here tonight while we're at it. Okay, so the Middle East situation, all right, there is a ceasefire, but that ceasefire has not been recognized. Lebanon's still being bombed and all of this. And now the latest thing is the New York Times dropped a bombshell and published an article that I think is fake news, claiming that Marco Rubio didn't want this war. Oh, yeah, right. Marco Rubio didn't want this. Yeah, that's what they claim. Oh, Marco Rubio did not want to attack Iran. JD Vance, maybe he didn't. I don't know. I tend to, who knows what JD Vance really wanted, but JD Vance didn't want to attack Iran. That the CIA director Radcliffe didn't want to attack Iran. That Trump did this all by himself with Netanyahu. And that Netanyahu, it is true that Netanyahu was in the war room. That's true. And that Netanyahu and Israel really wanted this. But Israel's got its fingers in Marco Rubio. Israel's got its fingers in Daniel Radcliffe and the CIA. Israel's got its fingers in J.D. Vance. But the New York Times claims this is all Trump. And you know what that says to me? That says to me that the USA wants out of this very badly. They're losing. They're losing the war, like Iran has pointed out. And they want to make Trump the fall guy. The Trump, they need desperately to negotiate an end to this war. They need to somehow convince Iran that they can negotiate with somebody else. And folks, I honestly think Trump is going to leave office pretty soon. I'll be honest with you. I think he's going to be out pretty soon because the way he's acting. I don't know if you saw this tweet. Trump's tweets have gotten more and more insane every day. There was the whole threat to wipe out an entire civilization. He was going to turn Iran into a living hell and blow up all their power plants. So it's like, I'm not saying this is actually not the most offensive tweet he made, but it's the most telling tweet. Okay. That's the thing. This is the tweet that Trump made that makes me think he's on his way out. And you look at this tweet, and the thing is, when Trump was making wild threats against Iran, they don't care about that, right? They like, wild threats against Iran. They hate Iran. When Trump is threatening to blow up a whole civilization, and they don't mind this. This is the tweet that Donald Trump made today. It's a long tweet, and this is what it says. Interpret this however you want. I'll tell you how I interpret it. Quote, I know why Tucker Carlson, Megyn Kelly, Candace Owens, and Alex Jones have been fighting me for years, especially by the fact that they think it's wonderful for Iran, the number one state sponsor of terror, to have a nuclear weapon, because they have one thing in common: low IQs. They're stupid people. They know it. Their families know it. Everyone knows it too. Look at their past. Look at their record. They have what it takes, and they never did. They have all been thrown off television, lost their jobs, and aren't even invited on TV because nobody cares about them. They're nut jobs, troublemakers, and will say anything necessary for some free, cheap publicity. Now they think they get some clicks because they have third-rate podcasts, but nobody's talking about them. Well, the president of the United States is talking about them. And their views are the opposite of MAGA, or I wouldn't have won the election in a landslide. MAGA agrees with me, just gave CNN a 100% approval rating of Trump. Not hand-flailing fools like Tucker Carlson, who couldn't even finish college when he was a broken man and when he got fired from Fox. He's never been the same. Perhaps he should go see a good psychiatrist, or Megyn Kelly, who nastily asked me about the now famous Only Rosie O'Donnell question, or crazy Candace Owens, who accuses the highly respected First Lady of France of being a man when she is not, and will hopefully win lots of money in the ongoing lawsuit. Actually, to me, the First Lady of France is far more beautiful than Candace. In fact, she's not even close. Or bankrupt Alex Jones, who says some of the dumbest things and lost his entire fortune, as he should have, for his horrendous attacks on the Sandy Hook shooting victims, ridiculously claiming it was a hoax. So these pundits are losers, and they always will be. Now, fake news, CNN, the failing New York Times, and other radical left news organizations are hailing them and giving them positive press for their lives. They're not MAGA. They're losers. They're just trying to latch on to MAGA. As a president, I could get them on my side anytime I want to, but when they call, I don't return their calls because I'm too busy on world and country affairs. And a few times they go nasty like Marjorie Trader Brown, but I no longer care about that stuff. I only care about doing right for our country. MAGA is winning, and strength is not allowing Iran to have nuclear weapons. MAGA is making America great again, and these people have no idea how to do that, because I do. The United States is now the hottest country anywhere in the world. President Donald J. Trump. Yeah. What do you take from that, folks? I'll tell you what I take from that. I think Trump is on his way out of office. And I think that he is furious that these people are all going to support him being ousted. Because Trump would not have won the 2024 election without Tucker Carlson on the stage, without these people all supporting him. Tucker Carlson was literally on the stage at all of Trump's rallies supporting him. He was the most popular TV host in America. Yeah, this rant, this tells me that Trump is really, really pissed because he's talking about the New York Times is boosting them, which it is, because MAGA will listen to them. And I think Trump is going to be the fall guy for this war. And I think that he's, the floodwaters around Trump are rising. And now the New York Times ran this article with the absurd claim, I don't buy, that he was the only one who did it. And that's so that, whoever replaces him, which is probably J.D. Vance, can say, see, I was against it, Iran. Don't worry. I would never have killed your supreme leader, and I'm telling you that I think that Trump is going to be ousted, and probably under the 25th Amendment. I don't think he'll be impeached because that requires a congressional procedure. It'll be the 25th Amendment, and I think it's only a matter of time before they get the cabinet together. And Trump is, they're going to declare he has dementia or something like that, and he's going to be out. And they need this because they need to end this war because they can't win, right? They've bitten off more than they can chew. And I think that Trump is going to be the fall guy for this war. He's going to be the fall guy for this war, and he's going to be out. How do I put this? We don't know. It ain't over till it's over. But I think Trump is going to be out of office soon. I think we're going to have President J.D. Vance, and President J.D. Vance is going to try to negotiate an end to this war with Iran. And I think it's a total lie that J.D. Vance, he may have kind of opposed it. I don't know. But Marco Rubio definitely didn't oppose this. And I really doubt Daniel Radcliffe of the CIA opposed this. And I really doubt Pete Hegseth opposed this. Pete Hegseth, look at him. He didn't oppose this. He loves war. And I think Trump, I honestly think that Trump was brought into office so this could happen. It's actually very interesting. I will draw a historical parallel between Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. And it doesn't exactly line up. But, Richard Nixon came into office in 1968. And in 1968, U.S. imperialism was in a crisis because they were losing in Vietnam. And because the Black community was rebelling, April of 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, and every major city in America went up in flames. The Black community rebelled. And on the college campuses, Students for a Democratic Society and, Maoist communist groups were growing. And in the Black community, Black nationalism, and particularly Marxist-Leninist, like Black nationalism, like the Black Panthers, was rising. And the country was in a crisis. The ruling class needed to bring the hammer down. And they also needed to make some big decisions about what to do about the fact they were losing the Vietnam War. They were all very divided about what to do about it. And so Richard Nixon, who had lost the presidential election to John F. Kennedy and was considered to be kind of a far-right kook, and the Rockefellers didn't like him. You can actually read, there's a good book, Market Elections, right? You can get a copy of this book. It's actually hard to find nowadays, but I've quoted it a lot. It's by one of the founders of the Workers' World Party. It's his analysis of the various U.S. presidential elections. Market Elections. This is a very good book. It talks about divisions in the ruling class and such. Richard Nixon, he lost to Kennedy. The Rockefellers didn't like him, but the country was in so much of a crisis. They needed to stabilize the country. And so, the FBI is a wing of the Department of Justice. And the guy that I used to work for, Ramsey Clark, was the Attorney General. And Ramsey Clark was constantly trying to hold back the FBI that was going after the Black Panthers. Richard Nixon said, the first thing I do when I take office will be to fire Ramsey Clark. And then he said, I have a secret plan for an honorable end to the war in Vietnam, a secret plan. So Richard Nixon won the election in 1968, and he fired Ramsey Clark, and he went to the FBI and he said, no restrictions, just go after the Black Panthers, do everything you need to do to crush the Black Panther Party. And then he launched Rolling Thunder, and he escalated the Vietnam War by just bombing the hell out of North Vietnam and Cambodia, because the Vietnamese, the National Liberation Front of Vietnam, had bases in Cambodia that they were using. They were crossing the border into South Vietnam, and he bombed the hell out of Cambodia, and he bombed the hell out of North Vietnam. And then it was pretty clear after that that they still weren't going to be able to win. And when Rolling Thunder failed, Richard Nixon started bringing troops home, started de-escalating, and they called it Vietnamization. And they said, we're going to train the Vietnamese to fight for themselves. They knew it wasn't going to work. They just said, we need to just start getting the USA out of Vietnam. Now, Richard Nixon came into office as kind of a right-wing Bonapartist, because Lyndon Johnson was not willing to do all those things. He wasn't willing to tell the FBI to take the gloves off and go after the Panthers. And he wasn't willing to escalate the Vietnam War. Lyndon Johnson, really didn't want to be associated with the Vietnam War. He knew it was very unpopular, and he was trying to not get any further involved. And when the Tet Offensive happened, he was very humiliated, and Lyndon Johnson didn't even want to run for president. So Richard Nixon came in as this right-wing strongman, this anti-communist from California, this conservative, and he came in there and he said, I speak for the silent majority. The silent majority, and escalated the bombing of Vietnam, sent the FBI after the Black Panthers. And by the time he ran for president, the country was back to stability. The Black community was no longer in a state of rebellion, and the USA was, bogging down its participation in Vietnam. And Richard Nixon was reelected as president in 1972. And then he followed the Rockefellers. David Rockefeller and Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski said we need to use China as an ally against the Soviet Union. And Nixon went to China and he met with Mao Zedong, and the USA and China started moving toward establishing diplomatic relations. And all of that was very controversial. The only way Nixon was able to do that was he was centralized power in his hands, right? He had an enemies list. He went after people he didn't like. He tried to, when the New York Times leaked the Pentagon Papers, they went after the guy who leaked them and tried to throw him in jail. And, the FBI, COINTELPRO did all kinds of nasty things. And Nixon had a list of people he considered loyal and opponents. And he was quite authoritarian. And by about 1973, the USA was back to normal. It wasn't the crisis of the 1960s was over. And at that point, then the ruling class ousted Richard Nixon. And what did they accuse him of? Well, he wiretapped his political opponents. Well, geez, I bet that's never happened before. Somebody wiretapping somebody. That J. Edgar Hoover wiretapped every member of Congress, right? The FBI was wiretapping people. They wiretapped everybody. Right. And it was mainly just so so J. Edgar Hoover could blackmail people and get what he wanted. And there's a phone call between Ramsey Clark and Lyndon Johnson talking about how J. Edgar Hoover wiretaps people and it's illegal, but there's no penalty for it. Right. You can listen to this phone call. I posted it on this YouTube channel. It's a famous phone call where they're like, basically, J. Edgar Hoover is wiretapping everybody without a warrant, and there's no penalty for it. So, the idea that Richard Nixon wiretapped the Watergate office building, it's illegal. Yeah, it's illegal, but, all kinds of people are doing that. The FBI was doing that. All kinds of people were wiretapping people, right? It's, it certainly was not a huge crime. But they played it up in the media, and they talked about the enemies list, and they talked about, about how the Department of Justice and J. Mitchell Palmer was covering up for Richard Nixon. And they, through the Watergate scandal, they ousted Richard Nixon. And basically the crime that Richard Nixon committed was doing exactly what they wanted him to do. There was a crisis in the country, and they needed an authoritarian strongman to come in and take some dramatic moves, which no one else was going to do. No one else. It was very controversial to escalate the Vietnam War. It was also very controversial to pull out, but Richard Nixon was willing to do that. It was very controversial to let the FBI just crush the Black Panthers. And he did a lot of other stuff too. He created the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA. And part of the reason he created it was so that if some rich person, if some corporation was, not supporting him, he would send the EPA after them, right? That was basically what he did, is that pollution was so common at that point, right? The environmental legislation was very new. And that basically Richard Nixon knew there were a lot of wealthy people who didn't agree with various decisions he would make. And so he had the EPA. And if you didn't agree with him, he would say, oh, geez, your factories are going to get inspected by the EPA. You're going to get some environmental fines. He knew what he was doing. Right. And Richard Nixon was a Bonapartist, right? That he was not even really a full Bonapartist, but he was a figure within the ruling class who centralized power in his hands to take dramatic moves that were necessary to stabilize capitalism in a crisis. And that is called Bonapartism. And, Karl Marx lived in France in 1851 when Louis Bonaparte became the military dictator. And he observed that Louis Bonaparte was centralizing power in his hands and taking dramatic moves to stabilize French capitalism. Now, Louis Bonaparte was doing that in the process of there was like a mass movement of people that supported him, and it was a complicated situation. And that Louis Bonaparte was a little bit more like a Roosevelt figure, in that he had kind of he was like a populist, kind of fighting for working people and suppressing capitalists. Richard Nixon wasn't doing that. But Richard Nixon was one section of the ruling class, kind of using the military and the policing agencies and centralizing power to stabilize the system, doing things that are not popular with many other figures within the ruling class for the good of the system. That's called Bonapartism. That's generally what Bonapartism is. That's generally what Bonapartism is. So Richard Nixon was a Bonapartist who centralized power in his hands. And then once the crisis that made him necessary was over, the ruling class ousted him. And it's kind of like, it's unfair. It's basically, somebody gets hired for a job and they give them instructions. They say, do this, and they do it. And then they say, how dare you do that? You jerk, you're fired. That's what basically happened to Richard Nixon. He was hired to do a job. He did it. And then they fired him for it. And then they condemned him for it. And, and I think that honestly, that is probably what may be the fate of Trump. Is that I think that the only reason they allowed Trump to win the election again was because Trump was probably the only figure within the current power structure who could have done this war against Iran. And he came into office saying he would no new wars, right? And no new wars. And he had this kind of populist appeal. So there was a lot of people who saw him as fighting the establishment. And this is, I always talk about all the people in the MAGA camp who don't support what Trump is doing. But unfortunately, there are, there's the other 60, 70% of the MAGA camp. It's not that high. I would say the other 50, 60, 55%. I mean, it's a majority, but it's like a slight majority of the MAGA camp that 100% approves of this. And why do they 100% approve of it? They think Trump is fighting the American establishment. And it's very sad. And I was talking to Noah about this. And Noah was talking to some of his coworkers that are Trump supporters. They think Iran is the American establishment. It's very, very, very sad. Trump appeals to people's anger at the American establishment. And that the Trump supporters that are supporting him right now, it's not that they have the American government line on Iran. I mean, they do, but that's not what's motivating them. It's not that they want to spread human rights. No, it's not even for a lot of them. I mean, for some, sure, it's about loyalty to Israel, but not all of them. That's a minority. For the people that are blindly supporting Trump's war right now, your average rank and file Trumper who is supporting this, which isn't isn't, a lot of them. It's a very big number of Trump supporters don't support this. But among the Trump supporters that are thinking Trump is doing great, and I think it's great that he started this new war against Iran, if you talk to them, they think they're fighting the establishment. And they think that the family member that they had that cut them off because they don't believe in gay marriage is Iran. And they think that, that the government, or the corporation that shipped their job overseas is Iran. And they think that, the drug addiction that killed their cousin or their brother is Iran, right? And they think that's what they think. And it's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. But in their minds, in the rhetoric of Trump supporters that are supporting this war against Iran, Trump is with me against the establishment. And the people that are against Trump represent that establishment. And Trump is killing, and he's being really mean and bombing people and threatening to wipe out civilization. And he's just being so tough. And that is my revenge on the establishment. That is what they believe. Okay. And it's important to talk about this. It's not deep. It's not well thought out. It's, not based on any knowledge. It's a feeling. It's because the party line in America, among the mainstream, among the liberals, is I hate Trump. And now the party line in the world, especially the Islamic world, is I hate Trump. And so they think Iran and their woke cousin and the mainstream media and China and, the company that shipped their jobs overseas and the opioid epidemic, it's all the same thing. And Trump is fighting against it. That's what they think. Okay. And if you didn't have that kind of anti-establishment energy, no other leader would have had any public support for this. The public support for this operation is very low, right? It's very, very, very low. It's about, maybe 15 to 20% of the public supports this. But among those who do, it is based on this anti-establishment rage. They are angry at the American establishment, and they see Donald Trump as fighting the American establishment. And because of that, he can do no wrong. And especially when he's blowing things up or killing people or punishing people, they're happy with it. They like it. And, that is important. And the problem with a lot of people that are opposing what Trump is doing, which I am one of those. I've protested this war. We blocked the No Kings parade. We protested an anti-Trump protest for not being pro-Iran enough. So don't get the idea that I'm totally against Trump at this point, right? There was a time where I was hoping to boost the peace wing of his presidency. I don't think he deserves any sympathy. I think he deserves to be impeached at this point. He deserves to be impeached and thrown in prison for war crimes at this point. He's going to go down in the history books as one of the most awful. I mean, just don't get me started, right? But the reason that I don't think Trump derangement syndrome is helpful, and the reason that I have been very cautious, and even up until this moment, I was not there. I was not in an F Trump place until now, is because of that anti-establishment energy. And because I see so many people who don't understand that. They do not understand that. If you talk to a leftist, especially a boomer communist, they think support for Trump and support for Bush are the same thing, and they're not. Trump was only able to do what he did because he had this anti-establishment energy. And I think, honestly, at this point, I think that Trump is not well. I mean, he has dementia. He's quite old. He's not young. And I think Trump has always been unstable, and we'll talk about that. It's funny. I wrote my book about Kamala Harris in 2020, and my book was mainly about Kamala Harris, but in the third chapter of the book, I spoke very negatively about Donald Trump. And during the 2024 election, when my book exploded and like 5,000 copies of it sold, and it was a big thing, it was on InfoWars and Jimmy Dore. Many people asked me about those passages about Trump, and I said, well, I'm not sure I would talk that way. I think I was right. Go and read what I wrote in my book on Kamala Harris about Trump. In that book, especially in chapter 2 of my book on Kamala Harris, the book that went viral, the book, is called Psychology Behind Politics. In that book, I basically, my thesis, and I stand by it, is that Kamala Harris was selected to be president because she is a damaged person. She is damaged and she is full of rage and she's easy to manipulate. And that's what makes her dangerous. And I pointed to her career. The first chapter was about her career as a criminal prosecutor. The second chapter was about her family background and her trauma. And the third chapter was about her fight with Tulsi Gabbard and what that represented. And in the second chapter of the book, I talked about, the personalities of various U.S. presidents, and that, Bill Clinton and Barack Obama have a very, very similar life story. Both of them never knew their fathers. Both of them were raised by single moms. Those single moms both married men who beat them and divorced men who beat them while they were raising their sons, right? Barack Hussein Obama never knew his father. His mother married Lolo Soetoro, the Indonesian general. Lolo Soetoro beat his mother. His mother divorced Lolo Soetoro, and Barack had a particular relationship with his mother, and he watched his mother be beaten by a stepfather, and that's the same thing that happened to Bill Clinton. Very interesting, isn't it? Democrat president of the 90s, Democrat president of the 2000s, similar life story. And Bush and Trump have a very similar life story also. Bush and Trump both had very successful fathers. George W. Bush, his father was George H.W. Bush. George Herbert Walker Bush was a CIA director, an oil company executive, eventually vice president and president of the United States. And his son, George, was the screw-up son. Jeb Bush was, somebody that they thought had political potential. But George W. Bush was arrested for drunken, rowdy behavior at a football game. George W. Bush was an alcoholic and a cocaine addict. George W. Bush was, he started a baseball team that failed and started all these businesses. And George W. Bush was a complete failure son, was a failure son of the Bush family. Trump, right? His father was Fred Trump, a very wealthy real estate executive in New York City. And Fred Trump had many children, and Donald was the son that he really hated the most, so much so that Fred Trump sent Donald Trump to a military boarding school in upstate New York that was meant to straighten out young men that were a discipline problem. So both George W. Bush and Donald Trump were the screw-up son of a very highly successful father who entered adulthood with something to prove on two levels. On the first level, they had to prove they weren't a failure, right? They had to prove they were not a failure. And Donald Trump, long before he was ever president, his persona was, I am famous for being a wealthy businessman. It wasn't enough to be a wealthy businessman. He had to be famous for it, right? And they talk about like Donald Trump used to, call up reporters and like speak in other voices to give them news tips about himself, to get himself in the news. And he always put his name on the side of buildings. And, Donald Trump really needed to be famous because he needed people to see, I am a successful rich person. I have this image of being a successful rich person, because his dad, who was a successful rich person, saw him as a failure. He was proving something to his father. George W. Bush also had something to prove, right? I mean, he went into politics, and he had something to prove like you wouldn't believe. But on top of that, in addition to just having this desperation to prove themselves, they both had a mean streak. They needed to not only prove that they were successful, they also needed to hurt other people. They needed to hurt other people. And I think that, Fred Trump, the military boarding school that Donald Trump went to was pretty harsh. Donald Trump was beaten pretty regularly there. You know, and that they needed to prove something. And George W. Bush, you know, I don't know all of the details about his upbringing in particular, but he had something to prove also, right? And both of them liked torture and insisted torture was a good thing, right? You remember that? I mean, George W. Bush legalized torture, and stood by it. And then Donald Trump said, well, it's no longer legal, but I think torture works. I think torture works. And we need to go after terrorist families. And both of them had this mean streak about them. They needed to hurt other people to prove that they were not weak. That, you know, it's almost like they had been emasculated at some point, right? You know, whether it was their father or, you know, the military boarding school where Donald Trump was at, or they had both had their manhood questioned. They had both been bullied and been humiliated, and they needed the world to see that they were men, that they were strong, and that they could hurt other people. They needed that. Donald Trump, I mean, it was to his own detriment. I don't think anyone voted for him because he said, I'm going to torture people. I think he needed to say that for himself. I don't think that's a winning position. If you say, I believe in torture, people are not necessarily going to vote for you. Some people might, but generally that's not a winning position. But I think Donald Trump was saying that for Donald Trump. And, you know, George W. Bush, I mean, there was a whole thing about, you know, torture. It was a big scandal. And you read about John Kiriakou and all of that, and that they both had something to prove. And that Donald Trump wanted to be president because he had something to prove. And, you know, he really hated Barack Obama, right? With a passion. Started the rumor that Obama was not born in America. You know, he really hated Obama with a passion because he wanted to be the president himself. He wanted that validation for himself. And I think at this point, Donald Trump probably has dementia. I think that he's probably, I mean, he's probably not all there. And he's not processing information properly. He thinks he's doing 100% approval ratings in the polls. I don't know what he's smoking. I don't know where that comes from. 100% approval rating. No president has 100% approval rating. Sorry, they just, you know, the Democrats did their No Kings rally on March 28th, and there are hundreds of thousands of, millions of people in the streets. I really don't think that he has a 100% approval rating, but he's convinced he's not processing information properly. You know, I mean, he's not in touch with reality. But he really needs to show the world that he's tough. He really, you know, he really needs to be remembered, and he has something to prove. And, you know, there are people around him, and this is the important thing. He didn't do this by himself. And Bibi Netanyahu isn't the only one. Donald Trump was picked for the job, and that's what people need to understand. This is a big problem with America, right? And somebody who knows more about world history and statecraft, maybe they can research this, but the phenomenon of the Mad King, right? You know, King George III of Britain, right? Who was the King of England during the American Revolution. You know, he lost his mind. He started talking to trees, and he became schizophrenic, basically. And he was a mad king, and he's not the first one. I think they say Caligula, the Roman emperor, was mad, and that, mentally ill rulers have existed throughout history. What is interesting about America, and I don't think this is necessarily the first civilization where this has happened. I think this is probably something that has happened in the past. And someone should do research about this. It's clear now that people rise up the ranks of the American political establishment because they're crazy. Yes. Yeah. You generally think, if you've got a job opening, right, and you interview somebody, and the interview is how stable they are, how responsible they are to get the job done. No, that's not America. That is not the America we live in. Kamala Harris, what I showed in my book, she got the job because she's batshit. Nobody who wasn't batshit would have done the things that Kamala Harris has done throughout her career and been able to sleep at night. Kamala Harris is batshit. How is she batshit? Well, she jailed the parents of kids who skipped school and felt like that was great because of that little girl was me, because my life was unfair. I experienced racism growing up, so that makes it okay for me to send a whole bunch of black parents to jail because their kids skipped school. That doesn't make any sense. Most people, if you said to them, all right, your job is to send, low-income black parents to jail because their kids skipped school, they would be like, no, nope, not going to do it. Not going to do it. Not going to do it. But Kamala has this image in her head of her 10-year-old self and how unfair the world was and how her dad was a lazy bum and was a loser and a Jamaican pothead and all, and she was abused and she was, and in Kamala's mind, yeah. And it's because of what happened to her. You saw the speech. She said, it's because of what happened to me. I wouldn't be anywhere if it wasn't for my education. In Kamala's mind, she is so much a victim. And she is so much, the world has been unfair to her. And she incarcerated black men at massive rates. She tried to keep people in prison beyond their sentences. There was a drug lab in California that was turning over false positive results, and she covered that up, and people went to jail because they were covering up that the drug labs were giving false positive results. I mean, she was pretty awful. And the only way that she was able to act with such total disregard for other people. I mean, other people go to jail and they didn't do the crime. So what? Other people are in jail and it's time to let them out. Yeah, but we need their cheap labor. How was she able to do this? Because she has a victim complex. The world has been unfair to her. She hates her dad. Her dad was just such an awful, loser. And I mean, I don't think he was. I think Donald Harris was probably, I mean, that's a whole nother story. Read my book, but she hates her dad. She feels like a victim. So whatever she does is okay. And that's why she rose up the ranks. She would do things that other people in the California, political establishment wouldn't do. They wouldn't do those things. But because Kamala Harris has a victim complex and feels and is traumatized and did experience probably some very, very bad things, right? I didn't include things I couldn't totally confirm in the book, but she never talks about her teen years in Canada. And I've heard rumors about what happened to her when she was a teenager in Canada. And it sounds like she was a victim of real crime in Canada. Let me put it that way. She was a victim of some real crime, and she's had bad things happen to her. And that she is so traumatized by those bad things. And then there are people around her that have learned to push her buttons. Kamala Harris rose up the ranks of American politics because she's bonkers and they know how to push her buttons. And I think the same thing about Trump at this point. I think he may have been saner in his first term. His first term was pretty shitty, but he may have been a little bit more together. But at this point, I think that Donald Trump is out of touch with reality. And there's somebody around him, that there's people in the room with him that say, you're polling at 100%, Donald. He's like, that's right. Of course I am. And it's like, he's got so much dementia. He doesn't even know. That you can't poll 100%. Nobody polls 100%. If you're going to lie, don't lie like that, right? If you're going to say you're winning in the polls, say you're polling at 75%. Say you're polling it at 65 or 80%. Don't say 100%. No one polls at 100%. He's so far gone. They don't care. He's the president. What are they going to do? You're polling at 100%, Donald. Yeah, that's right. I am. Why don't you threaten to wipe out an entire civilization? That'll scare them. Yeah, why did I do that? I would do that. I'm big and strong. I can wipe out a whole nation. That's right. You show them, Donald. You show them, right? Your dad said you were weak. You're not weak. That's right. That's right. Yeah, I'm wiping out an entire civilization. That's right. I'm going to blow up all the power plants. I'm going to blow up all the schools. Oh, fire and fury. I'm going to make life a living hell. That's right, Donald. That's right. You're strong. Don't let them talk down to you. Look at Tucker and Candace Owens. They never did anything for you. They're losers. Yeah, they're talking to him. There are people surrounding him who have studied him. They've studied his sociological profile. They've sat down with him. They've talked to his family members. And there's a crew of people who know exactly what to say to him, exactly what buttons to push. And he's not processing reality properly. And And because of that, he's out to lunch. He's out to lunch, and you know, that's why they picked him, honestly. They weren't going to let him run for president again. They were going to throw him in jail. They said he would never be allowed, but then, you know, I think they figured out this guy is crazy enough that he'll come into office thinking he'll end all the wars, he'll make peace, and then we'll say the right things to him, and we'll get this war with Iran that we wanted. And during the process of that war, it will become apparent that he's nuts, and then we'll blame it on him. And I think that's what's happening here, folks. I'm telling you, I think that the USA has lost this war. They need to end it somehow, and Iran is not going to negotiate with Donald Trump because of what he did, and what he said, and what I mean, how can you negotiate with a country that murdered your supreme leader? How can you negotiate with a country that threatened to wipe out an entire civilization, turn the country into a living hell? He basically threatened to exterminate all the Iranian people. How can anyone negotiate with that? So my theory is 25th Amendment. They're going to get together and they're going to say, you know, Trump had a little bit of an episode here, but we were all against it. Oh, yeah. Marco Rubio. Oh, we were totally opposed. Oh, and J.D. Vance and you know, oh, we're all totally opposed to this. And, you know, we just had to get him out. And they'll make him the fall guy. And then, based on that, and it's a lie. Let me just tell you that it's a lie. Marco Rubio wanted this war. Definitely, Marco Rubio absolutely wanted this war. J.D. Vance, I don't know. You know, I mean, there seems to be some leaks and things that have come out that hint that there might be some, like, just anti-war sentiments with J.D. Vance. I don't know if they're sincere. Maybe that's just what he wants us to know about him. But it seems like maybe J.D. Vance kind of might have opposed this, but not really. But you look, Pete Hegseth definitely didn't oppose this. I've never seen anyone who loves a war so much as Pete Hegseth. He wasn't opposed to this. He wasn't opposed to this at all. And, you know, but they're all saying, oh, yeah, we were totally against it. This was all Donald Trump. And then they're saying, all right, we got the supreme leader of Iran killed. We attacked Iran. We weakened Iran in all these areas. We killed all these Iranian leaders. We got done what we wanted to get done, and we'll make him the fall guy. Well, that wasn't America that did that. That was Trump, guys. That was Trump and Netanyahu. They did this. Right? They did it all by themselves. America would never, you know, and we need to separate this, okay? Because this is where things are getting complicated. So there's the New York Times that says Trump and Bibi Netanyahu did this all by themselves. I don't buy that. And please do not misinterpret anything I'm saying as saying that I buy that. I don't. Then there's a layer of people that say, oh no, Israel didn't want to do this. This was all America. Bullshit. Don't buy it. And then there's a layer of people that accurately say, and this is what I do say, is that Israel and the political and financial networks surrounding Israel and Mossad and all that have embedded themselves so well in the American apparatus that they're able to kind of force America to do things that the USA would kind of rather not do. That I believe. Right. And I think Israel is just part of the globalist international system, but they're a part of it that has so much weight and gravity. They can overrule other parts at this point. And I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. And I do take offense at the people that say that's not true. And oh, poor Israel is just a puppet of U.S. imperialism. I don't buy that. And I don't want to give you that rant again tonight. But the people that are saying, oh, this was all Netanyahu and Trump by themselves, that's ridiculous. That is absolutely ridiculous. Right. So we need to be careful because I see, you know, Ben Norton and all of them are running this line that, oh no, Israel is just being used. This is all U.S. imperialism. I don't buy that. And now the New York Times is running the opposite line that, no, this is only Trump. It's only Trump and Netanyahu. Nobody else wanted this. And I don't buy that either. I do not buy that either. And I think Trump is going to be removed from office, and he's probably going to be, you know, he's so unpopular at this point. He will probably be remembered in American history as a disgrace, and they will try to blame him for what they did against Iran, and they will probably try to use that to try and get Iran to negotiate with them in good faith, which, I mean, that's up to Iran. You know, I would like to see the fighting stop. I would like to see better relations between the USA and Iran, but I mean, if I was in Iran's shoes, I don't know what I would do. You know, I mean, it's very, very, very hard for me. I wouldn't feel right telling Iran, negotiate with America, make deals with America, trust America right now. I'm not going to say that after what America did to them, murdering their supreme leader, murdering them while negotiating twice, multiple times. No, I couldn't in good conscience urge the Iranians to just sit down and make deals with America. I mean, they have the right to do that. And I would like to see the killing stop. I would like to see peace, but I don't know. I mean, I mean, telling Iran to negotiate with America now, it's like, imagine that someone's home has been broken into 3 times by a criminal. And, and then you bring that criminal to their house and say, let him sleep over one night, just one night. Just one night. Let him sleep here. He won't break in this time. You'll let him in, and you just let him in the guest bedroom, and he won't do anything. And you can make sure he doesn't do anything. You're not going to do that, right? Could you do that, right? So let's say you had a neighbor who had a house, and a guy had broken into that house on 3 different occasions. The police had arrested him or whatever, and then you take that guy over to the house and you say, let him sleep over just one night. Would you feel right doing that to a neighbor? No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't tell that to anybody. I feel like they would look at me and say, you want me to put this guy in my house? He broke into my home on 3 different occasions. You want me to let him in? Are you out of your mind? And what could you say back at that point? I mean, they would be perfectly right to say that. And so to tell Iran, negotiate with America. Oh yeah, make a deal with America. I wish America had the credibility to negotiate with them right now. America does not have that credibility. I wish America, had treated Iran in a way that there was enough trust that they could make a deal. That is not the case. And I would like to see an end to hostilities. And I would like to see the Iranian economy and the American economy more connected to each other. And I mean, I would like what the results of such negotiations would be. But at the same time, I don't feel that I could, in good conscience, urge the negotiations to take place. And I couldn't honestly tell Iran that such negotiations would be done in a fair way. And no, this wasn't all Trump. This was not all Trump. It wasn't all Trump. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk to you all about tonight. We got to support Ranjeet Brar. We got to support Ranjeet Brar. We need to do everything we can to stand with Ranjeet Brar. We need to support Ranjeet Brar, stand with Ranjeet Brar. It's really, 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 really important that we do not let them criminalize anti-imperialist speech. We must stand with Ranjeet Brar. We got to stand with him, be 100%. We got to say, brother, we've got your back. That is something that we ultimately have to do. And so let's do the roll call. Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations, names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Then I'll answer questions. So who's with us? Names and locations, names and locations. Who is with us tonight? We got FL Tanky in Pensacola, Florida. FL Tanky, interesting. Raphael in Glasgow, Scotland. Good to see you, Raphael. We got Brian in Ohio, Penny in Minnesota, Chase in Nebraska, Lawrence Johnson in Chicago, Alex in Brazil, South African Master Jack, Ryan in Kansas City. Kansas City, here I come. Irene in Brooklyn. Good to see you, Irene. Good to see you. Names and locations. Patch in Arizona. How you doing, Patch? Marvin in New Jersey. Names and locations. Canberra. I don't know where that is, but it sounds great. Anthony in Detroit. Good to see you. Good to see you. Oh, everyone's here tonight. That's great. Anthony in Detroit. Good to see you. Good to see you. Good to see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. I will call you all out as I see you. Names and locations. Names and locations. Who is with us tonight? Names and locations. Names and locations. It's in Australia. All right. Very good. Very, 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 very good. Very, 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 very good. Good stuff. Good stuff, folks. Good stuff. Yeah, so I want to urge you all to donate to CPI. We've got a workshop coming up in LA. We've got a workshop coming up in Minneapolis. We've got an event coming up in New York City, and then we got the national convention. I am headed to Florida. I'm sorry. I'm headed to Missouri for the Uhuru convention next weekend, which is going to be great. I'm also headed out of the country for a little bit, and bills are piling up. I was able to finally get some funds. Thank you to everyone who's donated so far. I was able to pay the cameraman, who filmed things. I was able to get my tickets from Missouri, but I owe people. I actually owe different people to get everything done. So if you can send a contribution, that would make my day, right? If you can go to the CPI website and just hit donate, cpiusa.org/donate, that would be a great thing to do right now. Send us a couple bucks, or you can buy me a coffee and ask a question, and then I can answer your question. But yeah, if you want to just donate straight to CPI, the best way to do it is to just go to the website, CPI USA, and donate. That would be very helpful to us because, we are, financially, it's hard to do what we're doing, but we're doing what we do, right? And we do what we do well. And we got palm cards and we got the booklets, right? I got to still get these to the post office, hopefully before I leave town, and get these to Minneapolis and get these to LA. And, we got a lot going on. So if folks could send us a contribution, that would be great. And speaking of which, actually, our member, Penny and Gary in Minnesota protested against the Falun Gong China Before Communism song and dance extravaganza. It was actually a great video. I have been so busy with everything. It's been out for a while. I finally had a chance to watch it, and they did a splendid, tremendous job. So I'm actually going to show Gary and Penny protested against the Falun Gong and their anti-China hate show, so I'm gonna show the video on here if I can find a downloader that'll let me download it, and I will put it on. So yeah, this is Penny and Gary, and then I will answer any more questions. So if you got a question you want me to answer, right? Scott just sent a question. A lot of blank questions coming. Blank questions are fine, but Scott, did you mean to put something with your question, or was it just a donation? But yeah, if you've got a question, the best way to send your question is to go to Buy Me a Coffee. Buymeacoffee.com, is the best way to do it. But I'll put the link. It's buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Best way to send your question. And I can answer people's questions. So yeah, buymeacoffee.com/Caleb Maupin. Send your questions. But yeah, we're gonna watch Penny's the great video that they did of their countering the Falun Gong anti-China song and dance thing. Okay, all right, well, it looks like this downloader app doesn't work. All right. And the one I usually use doesn't work. See if we can download it here. But yeah, I want to download Penny's great video of their intervention against the Falun Gong, which is pretty neat. I thought it was great. So hopefully this downloader app works. The one that I usually use is down. So hold on, we're downloading Penny's video. All right. Nope. Yep. Okay. All right. We got it. Okay. So we're going to put on Penny's video. It's actually, it's a great, it's kind of, they've been doing these little protests in Minneapolis. And they've been doing them kind of, what do you call it? Kind of, in the style of like a skit. And it's very clever. I like what they do. I really do. And I don't know why here it is. Okay, it's downloading now. All right, so we're waiting for it to download, and then we'll put it on, and then I'll answer people's questions. Oh, it is a donation. Okay, good. I wanted to make sure because there was another blank one that came in and I didn't know if you had forgotten to or if somehow questions weren't being answered or something like that, but that's not the case. So that's good. All right, great. So, all right, here we go. Oh, it has no sound? Oh, this video has no sound. Well, goodness gracious, it has no sound. Well, what in the world? Goodness gracious. Goodness gracious, it has no audio. Well, that is obnoxious. Okay, all right. Well, I can't show this version of it because it has no sound. This is, yeah, ripping YouTube videos so that you can show them on your streams. It's not always the easiest thing to do. Some days it is easier than others. All right, we'll try another site. All right, we'll try it. Try this one. Right? I thought I could show that one, but it had no sound. That's okay. This gives people more time to think about their questions they want to send for the second half of the show. That's a lovely endeavor, right? No, that's not working. Okay. Oh boy. Trying to get the video so I can show it. Oh, okay. Okay. All right. Okay, it has sound. All right, here's a version of it that has sound. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Here we go. All right. All right. This is the Minneapolis CPI team, Penny and Gary, and it's like kind of a little skit they did of their little protest outside the theater that was doing the Falun Gong, China before communism nonsense. And they did a great job, and like little educational protests like this are great. We actually have one coming up pretty soon. I'm not going to give away what it is, but it was actually an idea that Noah had that I think is a really great idea. And that having little educational protests that are symbolic, I think is better than having the big ones. But anyway, this is their little skit video about China before communism, countering the message of the Falun Gong.
Hey Gary, you ready for Shenyang?
Shenyang, isn't that anti-China group that's sponsored by Falun Gong? And aren't the ticket prices like really expensive?
Yeah, it's like $150. That's crazy. You think they'd let us in like this?
Oh, I kind of doubt it.
Well, we can have our own fun right here. What did you bring?
Well, this represents a Chinese peasant's hat because before communism in China, there was feudalism and lots of peasants worked really hard with no modern farming equipment, and life was very difficult. And people often died because of famines.
Oh. Well, I brought an empress hat because an empress was chosen by God to rule the land, and that was better than communism.
Wow.
Wow. Well, I wrote a song about China before communism. Shall we sing it?
Yeah, let's sing the song.
All right. All right. I'm going to put this down. The British Empire had troubles of its own. The Qing dynasty destroyed their opium. They stormed the coast and took Hong Kong away. The Chinese then endured another century of shame. But China fought back. The world stood amazed. China fought back. We thought she was a goner, but China fought back. She just wouldn't stay away, 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 away. Japan went even farther because they needed land to farm. Their troops all crossed the border, trained to do all kinds of harm. They marched across the cornfields, stole the farmers' crops. Japan exported grain yields at the farmers' loss. But China fought back. The world stood amazed. China fought back. We thought she was a goner, but China fought back. She just wouldn't stay away, 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 away. Shenyang, March 27 through 29. Welcome to Shenyang, everybody, in Minneapolis at the Orpheum Theater. China before communism was feudalism. So what was China before communism?
China before communism was feudalism. And then the peasants had to work really hard for very little money. They didn't have modern farming equipment like tractors and combines and things. And then China was exploited by Western powers like the British and the Americans.
Yeah, they worked really hard. They have a beautiful skyline now. Have you seen pictures of it?
Yeah, it's amazing. That's one of the most modern skylines in the world. Before communism, the skyline was very modest and there was practically any development at all, and people were pulling each other. People were being pulled around in rickshaws.
Yeah, I heard it was pretty overcrowded and they had to deal with overcrowding in the cities. Women, what was it like for women? I heard there was foot binding.
Yeah, foot binding was a pretty horrible practice that wasn't eliminated until like 1912.
Yeah, you know, what I read is that it started with the imperial powers and it eventually became a status symbol in the wealthy classes. And poor women would bind the feet of their eldest daughters so they could get better marriage opportunities because there just wasn't economic opportunity then. But now they have 3 female astronauts. Liu Yang was the first female astronaut in 2012, and she was a crew member on the Shenzhou 9. So they have a lot more economic opportunities, I guess, right?
Imagine that, millions of women getting an education and even becoming astronauts. We really need to go bomb those people and liberate those women.
From that oppressive Chinese Communist Party, right?
I know, they're so oppressive.
Wow. Imagine the headlines. We freed China. We freed Afghanistan. We freed Iraq. We're freeing Iran right now. They're so happy with us. What about transportation? I see they have high-speed rail everywhere. What was it like before?
Yeah, before they were like, people were being pulled around in rickshaws, and there was lots of exploitation, and now even banned that practice. But now they have 31,000 miles of high-speed rails that connect cities of 500,000 people and makes China the second largest economy in the world.
That's amazing. That's why we're supposed to fight them, right? Because they're a competition. Yeah, you know, we have light rail in Minneapolis, and we have one line that's 10 miles that they've taken 10 years to build. That's a ripoff. So why is this Falun Gong organization going around the world preaching China before communism?
Well, they were actually founded in 1992, and they claim that they're a spiritual organization that does things like faith healing, and they claim that the Chinese government is oppressing them and not letting them practice their religion freely, which people used to do for thousands of years in China. At least that's their claim anyway. But then they want us to go bomb China to like save them or something.
Wow, bombing another country for somebody else. That sounds really familiar. So what does the Chinese government claim against them? That they're such a threat?
Well, because they believe in things like faith healing, and not only that, but people aren't doing things like taking their medicines, and it was getting kind of dangerous. Not that people can't have any kind of religious freedom that they want, because we're all for religious freedom here in America, and it's in our Constitution, and that's a great thing. but it shouldn't be a front for trying to do a color revolution and bombing a country.
But, you know, religious freedom. Didn't we just kill the Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran? That's like killing the Pope. And Japan, they just dissolved the Unification Church, and Mother Moon is being held in a tiny little cell at 82 years old, and she can't even get hospital care. That's what religious freedom looks like, right?
台湾同胞的生活必将因此获得更大的便利，比如我们可以帮助迅速地建成环岛高铁，建设更多连接本岛东西部的高速铁路，两岸基础设施联通将逐步变成现实。比如，我们可以共同建设研究多年的海峡快速通道，让天堑变通途。台湾民众到时候就可以从本岛出发，沿金台高速铁路自驾到北京来游览。总之，和平统一将是台湾基础设施、新型基础设施焕然一新的起点。希望广大台湾同胞像追求人生幸福一样，追求两岸和平统一，让自己工作生活的家园更畅通、更便捷、更美好。
Taiwan is buying jets that are coming from Uncle Sam. The island citizens are trying to, could they be a battering ram? They make the microchips and defend democracy. If they want to have a future, then they'll choose diplomacy. Because China fights back in a mighty way. China fights back. She'll never be a goner because China fights back. She ain't gonna go away, 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 away. So what do we need? We need a government of action that fights for working families. CPIUSA.org.
Well, that was a great video. There you go. Yeah, we'll post that on the CPI website with a little article. It's a great video. I finally got around to watching it today. I've been meaning to watch Penny's video for a long time, but I just had so many things. That was great. Penny is doing a lot of great work out there. LA is doing great stuff. I saw Dan while I was on here. He just sent me a report, you know, about what they've been up to lately in LA. I need to listen to that and find out some more, and all kinds of great things are happening. So, yeah, so we'll start doing Buy Me a Coffees. John said there was an amazing exchange today on Twitter between Ro Khanna and Marjorie Taylor Greene. Dan McAdams of the Ron Paul Institute even joined it. And I think we are seeing the beginning of the left-right populist anti-war coalition that we need. And so this is really, really great. Ro Khanna tweeted, thank you for reaching out in your kind words to Marjorie Taylor Greene. Your voice against the war in Iran and for the survivors of the Epstein class has made a difference. It was courageous. As you know, my politics are about creating prosperity for left out Americans who have been shafted and tackling the massive economic divide. I call it a new economic patriotism. I like that. I am willing to work with people of goodwill from both parties or no party to advance that vision. Understanding we will certainly have serious disagreements on many individual issues, our general view on the role the government can play. Spirited debate is what this nation is all about. Looking forward to dialogue on how to stop the militarism of foreign wars of choice, hold the Epstein class accountable, and actually deliver for millions of working class Americans who built our nation. I am game. Yeah, we need to, if this could be, you know, if after woke and after MAGA, we have a populist wave, that would be the best thing for this country. And that doesn't mean we won't have work to do. We'll have to intervene in that, you know, but that would really be the best thing. And I like what Ro Khanna is saying. I love Marjorie Taylor Greene and new economic patriotism. That is what I've been talking about. I was canceled for, you know, year after year after year for socialist patriotism. Everyone said it was white nationalism. I was actually a white supremacist for saying socialism with American characteristics, patriotic socialism, thousands of tweets. I said it, I said it, I said it, and now it's caught on. It's caught on. It's become a thing that people say. It would be nice if the people who canceled me for it would apologize, that are now saying it. It would also be nice if the people who have tried to make it their own would acknowledge that I said it for years and got canceled for it for years, and it was wrong what was done to me. But generally I don't mind, right? When, we have been saying new economic patriotism, something like that, for the longest time. And I don't mind generally if people take ideas that we have promoted and incorporate them. I don't mind it. It's not like intellectual property. The only people that I mind are the people that weaponize these ideas against us, right? And I have seen that. And there are certain people that sound just like us, and they literally watch our content and take notes, and they try to weaponize everything we do here against me personally. There is another organization that I believe was set up by the FBI, and they do nothing but copy our content and then tell people nasty things about me on a personal level. And it's ridiculous. And I just don't even want to pay attention to it. Somebody, a good friend, shout out to you, friend, I guess I won't say your name, reached out to me today and told me about this. And I said, I don't want to hear it. I just really am not interested in what these people are doing. But no, there's a group of, we're talking like Midwest Marks, people like that. They have seen what we have done here, and they have taken it and they are weaponizing it against us. And they spread lies about me, and they have done awful things, but then they take our ideas and they try to weaponize it against us. And that's unforgivable. I have no problem with people advocating socialist patriotism. I want more people to advocate it. But when you do it, it would be nice if you'd acknowledge, and the way Caleb was called a neo-Nazi for year after year for what we are saying now is wrong, and acknowledge that, and don't spread lies about me at the same time as you're using the ideas I've fought for. And there's a whole pattern of this. I do something and I come out and say it, and I get smeared and canceled for it. And then other people do it, and suddenly, and it's okay. I met with Alexander Dugin, the Russian philosopher, in 2018. 2018, before any of these fools were out there, I met with Alexander Dugin. And as a result, my reputation, I was an evil fascist. I was all of this. And then these fools turn around and they meet with Alexander Dugin. And do they acknowledge, hey, Caleb did this first, and he's a good guy, and what was said about him and the way he was defamed and, wasn't welcome and was banned from leftist spaces was wrong? No, they don't do that, right? And there's just so many examples of this. And again, I want more people to meet with Alexander Dugin and study him, but it would be nice if they didn't do what I did first, right, while they're canceling me. And it would be nice if they didn't join the campaign against me while doing the things I've been canceled for. I really don't appreciate that, right? And again, I believe this other organization, and you guys know who I'm talking about, was set up by the FBI. They don't do anything. They're not doing any activism. All they do is go to other people's stuff. They go to churches they're already volunteering and take selfies of themselves. They're not a real group. They are set up to prevent people from knowing about CPI. They basically, everything that we've done, they do a really cringe version of it. And they don't understand it. They don't understand it. I was always the one saying, let's engage Trump supporters because they're against the establishment. That's a reasonable position. These people said, MAGA communism. And I'm like, that's dumb. Anyone who's MAGA hates communism. Anyone who's communist hates MAGA. That's the dumbest thing ever. They took what was a legit thing that I went out and advocated for and got smeared for, and then they got boosted and blasted by social media for something that was idiotic. MAGA communism, right? And the same people that talk about MAGA communism now want to tell me I was too pro-Trump. Look, you guys were literally calling yourselves MAGA communists, the most cringe thing I've ever heard. And you want to tell me I was too pro-Trump because we boosted the anti-war voice? Shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. Right? Another thing, my position on social issues, gay marriage, abortion, trans stuff, sex work, has always been We don't have a position. Neutral. Live and let live. And these people, and we got attacked for that because the woke left was demanding, no, you must be pro women's bathrooms and you must be pro women's sports, men and women's sports, and you must be, and we just said, we just don't take a position. These people came along, and instead of doing that, while they were pretending to be our friends, they started using slurs, calling people faggots and trannies and queers and all kinds of really nasty words. Well, our position was neutrality. We were not in favor of bullying people or harming anybody. We just also believe that people that are religious and conservative should be welcome, And these people, everything that we have done over the years, right? They take it and they turn it into something cringe, or they just take it as their own while spreading lies about us, right? They are evil and they are a government creation. Why would Israel tweet out an April Fool's joke? I'd really like it if Israel tweeted out an April Fool's joke about me. Have a feeling they won't do that. Maybe it's because Israel doesn't want people to look at me, and Israel does want people to look at this asshole, And, we're willing to work with anybody. We really are. We're willing to work with anybody. But, when people go out of their way, right? When they go out of their way to tell lies about you, to spread nasty personal rumors about you, and you, what are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do at that point? And I mean, these people are the enemy. They really are. Right. And I mean, what they have done to me, what they have done to my family, to my wife, it is unforgivable. Right. And just because people sound like us, yeah, it's easy to copy somebody. I could listen to somebody and sound like them if you want. I do great impressions on these streams. I'm George W. Bush, Commander-in-Chief of America. Anyway, next question. All right. AJ Williams says, keep spreading the anti-imperialist message. Well, thank you, AJ. Doing our best. Dare to struggle, dare to win. Sick and tired, he didn't have a message. Well, I appreciate it. And same with Scott. He didn't have a message. He sent it. Well, great. All of you. Great. Glad you're doing it. I appreciate the support. We're doing the best we can. All right. So, wow. Hempcar has sent a lot of questions. The book, Without Your Consent, talks about army whistleblowers being sent to psych wards. They claim Russia used to do this. Ian Fishbeck died. Frank Gregory Ford's another. I don't know about that. I mean, that is widely alleged that in the Soviet Union, that people that were outspoken critics of the Soviet government were declared mentally ill. And it appears that, that to some degree or other, that is true. I don't know. I just don't know. I mean, it had to have gone on at least a little bit, probably, based on what I've seen. How widespread was it? I don't know. I mean, there was a conversation I had with somebody once, a guy from Belarus, here in New York City. I was in a bar with a friend. I don't drink in bars, but I was with a friend. We were at a bar where there was a lot of people from Eastern Europe. There's a guy from Belarus. He hated the government of Belarus. He's one of these expats. And he says, that Lukashenko is a liar. He's a liar. And I said, why is he a liar? And they said, well, Lukashenko always brags there's no homeless people in Belarus. I said, okay. He said, that's because he puts them all in mental hospitals. And I said, well, isn't employment guaranteed by the state in Belarus? He said, yeah. I said, isn't housing guaranteed by the state in Belarus? He said, yeah. I said, so if you're homeless in a country where you're guaranteed a job and you're guaranteed housing, you probably are crazy. And the guy looked at me and he said, actually, yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, you probably are crazy. That's a good point. I never thought of it that way. It's true, right? I mean, think about it, right? If you have a society where the government guarantees housing to everybody and guarantees healthcare to everybody and guarantees a job to everybody, and someone is still living on the street, they probably need help meeting their own needs. There's probably they are somehow mentally ill or intellectually disabled or something like that. And I've had people argue with me and say, well, Caleb, there are homeless people in Cuba. You Caleb, say that there's no homeless people in Cuba. Well, I went there, and one time in downtown Cuba, there was this crazy woman who was walking around who smelled funny and all this. And I'm like, well, I mean, do you know that she was homeless? I mean, she might have lived in, some kind of facility. I mean, and I mean, if she was mentally ill, she might have been voluntarily homeless. And don't they have services? So that's where it all gets kind of touchy. But as far as dissidents, I mean, that's not right. Someone shouldn't be shown in a mental hospital for their political views. And to whatever degree the Soviet Union did that, that's wrong. I'm not in favor of that. So there you go. I actually don't know enough about mental health in the USSR. I really don't. I do know that psychoanalysis was like Freudian stuff was practiced in the Soviet Union. And I find that very interesting. And I'd like to research more about to what degree that was the case. Because, but apparently there was a Freudian influence in Soviet society. And, the belief that was common in the Soviet Union that Nazism was repressed homosexuality, that's a very Freudian belief, right? And that was a really common theme among anti-Nazi propaganda during the Second World War, was that the Nazis were people who suppressed their own homosexuality. And that's a very Freudian kind of teaching. And so, I'm interested in the role of psychoanalysis in the USSR, the overlap, right? Sigmund Freud was not in favor of communism. He denounced Marxism. And I really do recommend, there's a very good book called Freud and Marx, a Dialectical Study, published by the British Communist Party in the 1930s. Very, very good book. And I believe Sabina Spielrein, who was one of the original psychoanalysts who worked with both Freud and Carl Jung, who was one of the founders of psychoanalysis. She was living in the USSR and was actually killed during the Second World War by the Nazis for her Jewish heritage. So I'm curious about to what degree or other the Soviet state allowed and practiced, psychoanalytic stuff. Among the Bolsheviks, I have a feeling, especially the early Bolsheviks, there was probably a lot of them that were into that kind of thing. The European radical intelligentsia, people like, what is her name? The Bolshevik feminist sexual liberation woman. I can't remember her name. What is her name? The one that was, who I'm talking about, right? She was I can't even remember her name. She was one of the Bolshevik leaders who was really into sexual freedom and stuff. And actually Lenin criticized her a little bit. And I cannot remember her name, but anyway, she was Anastasia Kollontai, right? Yeah. I mean, I think, her crowd would have been into psychoanalysis. I feel like the Freudian stuff would have been, Alexandra Kollontai, not Anastasia, Alexandra Kollontai, right? I feel like the Freudian crowd would have loved her, and she did, repudiate. She was part of some of the Trotskyite opposition groups and stuff, but she repudiated. I mean, she became pro-Stalin, and she lived up into the 50s, and she was, so I'd be curious to what degree or other, whoever you are, you're a smart person. But that's the one I was thinking of. So I don't know. We'll see. I'm curious, I'm curious about all this kind of stuff. So, all right. Okay. COVID-19 operations. Okay. Sorry, Hempcar, I'm not going to read that. Many maps don't show Palestine, but just Israel. Someone dotted a line. Well, that's because Israel has no clear borders, right? You have the West Bank, which they're constantly expanding into. You have Gaza. There's no clear borders. Israel doesn't define its borders, so it's very hard to put Palestine on a map when there's no clear border of where it is, right? Israel's the only country in the world with no borders. There's a pretty big paragraph. You can't use indentation. I heard Mein Kampf was written hysterically like that. Well, so I've actually read Mein Kampf, okay? And, first of all, let me just throw this out there. Why not read Mein Kampf? At multiple places in my life, I've had people get upset with me for having read Hitler's autobiography. Why wouldn't you read it? Hitler is one of the most brutal mass murderers in history who launched the Second World War. And he popularized his evil mass movement with a book that was very widely circulated throughout Germany. And, if you're interested in politics, I don't see anything wrong with reading it. I've read it, and I don't think it's particularly well written, but I understand the context and why it was written in the way it was written. It was an answer to Marxism, Marxism in Germany. You had the German Social Democrats, then later after World War I, you had the German Communists, and that they were very hyper intellectual and very philosophical and ideological. And so the Nazis, presenting themselves as an alternative to Marxism, as a so-called revolutionary movement, they had to present themselves in kind of a hyper intellectual way. Nowadays, that's not the case, or at least not in America, right? But even now in Europe, the culture is much more, people are much more bookish, people are much more philosophical, and that in the context of Germany in the 1920s, if Hitler was marketing himself as some kind of revolutionary leader, he had to write a book. And that there are times when that book is very tedious, right? There are a lot of passages in that book that are way too long, way too long. He could have said in a paragraph what he says in 10 pages, right? It's very long and drawn out. And especially the end where he's laying out the beliefs of the Nazi party, it's a lot of gobbledygook. But basically, this is Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf, it starts out, which I think this is fascinating, right? Mein Kampf begins with him talking about how much he hated his father, right? That's interesting to me. And, if you look at all the leaders from that time period, they all have like an autobiography about how much they hated their father. Stalin, same thing. Mao, same thing. Winston Churchill, same thing. And they all have this like, I hated my father thing going on. And that's, people have wondered if that's even true, right? If that was some kind of psychological thing that they picked up on, that like the people that might join a mass movement to follow Winston Churchill or Stalin or Hitler would be, would identify with those kind of feelings or something, because it's very interesting, because it's like all of the leaders of modernity, have a backstory about how much they hated their dad, which is very odd. And in Mao's case, in Mao's case and Hitler's case, they both like marketed themselves as, I have father issues, which is a little like, why would you do that? But it starts out, he didn't get along with his father. And he became a painter. His father wanted him to be a government official. He wanted to be a painter. So he moved out, had a falling out with his family, moved out, and he ended up, he wanted to go to art school, but he was rejected by art school. And so he ended up becoming like a house painter. He just painted houses. Like he was a manual laborer. He just painted houses. But then World War I happened, and he fought in World War I, and he describes World War I as just like the most epic thing. It's sickening the way he describes World War I. World War I was one of the most horrendous wars in human history. 20 million people dead, poison gas. It was just, muddy trenches and trench foot infections. And like you look at World War I, it's just one of the most ugly wars. But he describes fighting in World War I as this most beautiful thing that is ever. It's just epic, and he's using like it's an opera or something. So then from there, he talks about how he was blinded during World War I by poison gas, and he wakes up, he thought he was dead. He wakes up in the hospital. He can't see, but he hears the people in the hospital, and all the people in the hospital have injured themselves in order to avoid fighting. They shot themselves in the foot. They, and that a lot of the people in the hospital, they don't want to die in the war. They didn't want to die in the war, so they injured themselves. And he's just horrified that they have done this. It's so unpatriotic and so disloyal. So, and the reason that they're injuring themselves is because they're reading communist publications that are encouraging them not to fight for their homeland. That makes him really, really angry. He comes back from World War I. He's homeless. He's a homeless veteran, and he's really upset. And he, first he joins the Christian socialist movement, right? Because, he wants to be against capitalism, but he hates Marxists because they're subversive. They don't have good morals or whatever. And that doesn't work because they're too nice. The Christian socialists are too nice. They're not angry and stuff. And so then he becomes a pan-Germanist, which was a movement that wanted to merge Austria and Germany together. And he joins the pan-Germanists, but he hates them because they're too closely associated with the Habsburgs, the monarchy. And he thinks the monarchy of Austria is weak and all of that. And then it leads to, and I've started my own party, the Nazi party. That's what Mein Kampf is about. And I see in Mein Kampf, first of all, and this is interesting to me, is, you know, in America, we're used to the rags to riches stuff. We're totally used to that. That is just a big, that's part of Americana, right? Horatio Alger. Hitler, the German Nazi movement, really emphasized rags to riches. He was a homeless painter on the street, and then he became the great leader of a nation. That is a really, really big part of Nazi stuff. And I think that's very, very interesting. You know, and I didn't realize that, but if you read Mein Kampf, that's really emphasized. And if you listen to any of Hitler's speeches, he really emphasized, I was a poor person, but I was a homeless veteran. But now I'm the great leader of the nation. It was like he was rags to riches. He was an everyman, right? We all suffered. And that's a really big part of Hitlerism, is this, you know, if I can go from being a homeless person to being the chancellor of Germany, so can you. That was kind of his message. You know, that's interesting. And that's also, you know, rags to riches is very much identified with America. It's not as big a part of European culture. In Europe, and especially in Britain and places like that, they have much more of a sense of class. You know, that, you know, they don't believe in social, what do you call it? You know, I forget what it's called, but, you know, people rising, you know, they don't believe in that as much. So that's interesting. The other thing that's interesting is that an aspect of Nazi propaganda that I think is, I don't even know quite what to make of it, is that there's a lot of hints of Hitler being divine, you know, in the Nazi literature, but they never claimed he was a god. But there was a lot of like hinting that he had magical powers, or that he was somehow like the voice of the god Odin or something like that. And that's another thing that doesn't really, like, you have to look at the material from that time. And that's very, very strange. And it's, they were like kind of doing a balance, right? If they had said that Hitler was God, or said that Hitler was magical, people would have immediately started ridiculing them, or they would have demanded that he do magic in front of everybody, and he wouldn't have been able to do it, and he would have looked like a fool. So they couldn't exactly claim that Hitler was a god, but they could just kind of hint it, right? And the way the Nazi rallies were staged and stuff, a lot of the people thought he was magical, and they staged the Nazi rallies in a way that like gave the impression that he was like some kind of prophet or god or something like that, but they never would actually say that he was that. That I find to be a very, very odd aspect of Nazism. And I think that that's because they were on the right, and they were really into Wagnerian stuff and Germanic paganism, but they, you know, and that there was an element of like they were building some kind of mystical religious movement, but they could never say that, right? The Nazis on paper were pro-Christian, but within the Nazi party there was this book called what's it called? It's called The Myth of the 20th Century by Alfred Rosenberg, where they said that like Christianity was actually a Jewish conspiracy. And, you know, they had, you know, like all kinds of, you know, beliefs. They were like Germanic pagans and stuff like that. But officially, even until the end, the Nazis claimed they were Christian, that they were either Lutherans or Catholics. And Hitler professed Roman Catholicism as his belief system, as his religion. So that's also very odd. Nazi propaganda is very strange. I will say one thing, that Nazi Germany is something that everybody knows everything about and nobody knows anything about. And that is a really odd aspect of America. You know, they used to call the History Channel in America the Hitler Channel, because every film, every show was about Hitler. Hitler's dog, Hitler's niece, Hitler's cousin, inside Hitler's bunker, inside Hitler's dacha in the mountains, inside Hitler's gun, Hitler's tank, Hitler's car, Hitler's shoes, Nazi uniforms, Nazi humor. There's like it was like History Channel talked about nothing but Hitler. But nobody knows anything about Hitler. It's all focusing on like weird biographical subjective shit. But it wasn't really, I didn't really know a lot about Nazi Germany and what really went on there until I read, I think I've got it on the shelf here. This book, it's actually not a biography of Hitler. It's a biography of the Nazi economist Hjalmar Schacht. There's a book called Hitler's Banker. And it's a biography of Hjalmar Schacht, who was the economist of Nazi Germany. He was a German financier who who, bankrolled Hitler and made Hitler famous, made Hitler was like the main financial backer of Hitler and became Hitler's finance minister, the head of the German Reichsbank. And when I read that book, I understood the economics of Nazi Germany, and it all made sense. And I quote that book extensively in a lot of my writing, that Nazi Germany, you really, until you read about the economics of it, right? You don't really, and none of the history talks about the economics. It always talks about, his house, his car, his sister, his dog, his cat, what kind of costumes he wore, him being a vegetarian, but they never talk about what actually happened. When you read about the Weimar Republic and you read about the rise of Hitler, you're understanding, you have to understand economics. Economics is like one of the most important things to understand. And nobody understands economics. And that's one of the big problems that we have, is that everyone thinks economics is too complicated to understand. It's like they start hearing people talk about GDP and things like that, and they say, oh, no, I can't understand that. Well, you can. You can understand economics. Economics is not that hard to understand. There's a few key books I would recommend if you want to understand economics, right? Well, first of all, read anything by CPI. Read, Where is America Going by me. Read What is Innovationism or whatever. But on top of that, if you want to understand economics, you can read this very simple book called The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary. You can read another great book called Low Wage Capitalism, Colossus with a Feet of Clay by Fred Goldstein. You can read High Tech, Low Pay by Sam Marcy, which I recommend. You can read Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt, and you can read Dialectical Economics by Lyndon LaRouche. I recommend this, and you read them, you'll understand economics. Economics is not that difficult. Now, there's another economist. There's a South Korean economist who's actually very good. And I actually would recommend, Economics, A User's Guide. And he's anti-Malthusian and he's pro-growth. His name is Ha Jun Chang, right? He wrote Economics, A User's Guide. It's a very, very good book. I would recommend that. And he's a Marxist, but he's anti-Malthusian and pro-growth. So read Economics, The User's Guide by Ha Jun Chang. A lot of economics is not that hard to understand. Supply and demand, economic growth, glut, overproduction, some of it, yeah. So there's the hyper economics that we have now, right? The way Wall Street works, yeah, you have to go to college, and they don't want people to understand that. But the basics of economics, I think, are not that hard. And and it's not really until you understand that you really get it. I didn't even really understand what Marxism was all about until the 2008 financial crisis. I was attracted to the aesthetic of communism, the red flag. I was angry at society. I didn't like that I'd been lied to about communism, but it wasn't until like 2008, 2009, when the US economy crashed and the Marxist group I was in made a really big point of educating people about why the crisis, the crash had happened. That's when I began to understand economics. And I read, Low Wage Capitalism and High Tech, Low Pay and The Future is Up to Us by Nelson Peary. And I started to get it. And it's not really until then that I even started to get it. And actually, Marxist economics and the spiritual, like the aesthetic of Marxism, don't really have anything to do with each other. It's almost like Karl Marx had two sides. On the one side, he was a spiritual leftist. He was at war with God. He was embracing rebellion. He wanted ruthless criticism of all that exists and dialectical materialism. And on the other hand, he just understood the world economy. And actually his economic teachings and his spiritual, philosophical, intellectual, political battle against authority, they actually don't line up that well. And I think that what we're seeing in our time is that the spiritual and philosophical and aesthetic and emotion of Marx is being like decoupled from the economics of Marx. And I think that's a good thing. I don't agree with Marx's dialectical materialist philosophy. I don't agree with Marx's, and I think that honestly, his left aesthetic was not helpful, and that modern socialist countries like Vietnam and China and Cuba, and they don't espouse the Marxist. They're not preaching permanent revolution. They're not preaching tear it down and blood and kill every last king. They're actually teaching, oneness and unity and love of community. And they have a planned economy, and they understand that imperialism is degrowth, and they believe in human creativity, and they invest in human creativity. I mean, is Ibrahim Traore a Marxist? I don't know. Is this great African leader that we've been promoting in CPI, is he a Marxist? Is he? I don't know. I mean, he believes in God. He's a Muslim. He was in a socialist student group when he was in the university, but he's never said, I believe in communism, I'm building socialism. But he's doing whatever he's doing is amazing, and I like it. And most Marxists don't. Most Marxists don't like him. And it's not spiritually Marxism. It's not in rebellion. He's investing in people. He's investing in human creativity. He's investing in the next generation of his country. And he's using the government to invest and build up. He has a pro-growth, pro-humanity government. That I like. And if you read Marx's economics, you would come to the conclusion to do what he's doing. But, what he's putting out there, I think he's actually quite socially conservative. They're pretty anti-LGBT, pretty anti-abortion, pretty traditional family. It's pretty conservative, right? So I think we're in the period where Marxist leftist aesthetics and Marxist economics are decoupling from each other. And that's very important. There's a couple other things you can read if you want to understand economics. But understanding economics is really, really, really important. And it is really my economic understanding. That's what I hold on to. I feel like I got over a lot of my attraction. I'm pretty much disgusted by the left aesthetic now. I feel like it is so damaging, and I see the result of it. I mean, it's just you can't live that way. You can't be a hateful person. You can't be at war with the world, right? You have to forgive. You have to reconcile. I don't want to be a leftist spiritually anymore. I'm a conservative spiritually, I guess you could say. But at the same time, I very much believe in the Marxist economics. I really do, and I understand why Russia and China became superpowers. I understand what imperialism is. So yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other economics books I could recommend. Look, we have this little booklet. You can read it for free on the CPI website. Do you believe in growth? That's kind of a basic introduction to the perspective that we got. So we got all kinds of stuff. So good times, folks. Good times. Good times. Iran's 10-point negotiations say they want money for damage done. Isn't Vietnam still waiting for that? Yes, they are. The USA promised negotiations to Vietnam as part of the negotiations, and the USA has never paid the reparations they owe to the Vietnamese people for chemical weapons that were used, Agent Orange, all kinds of stuff. That is, you're absolutely right, Hempcar. Bro, he's fighting the deep state, New World Order by taking out the last nation on earth. Yeah, exactly, right? They just don't get it. The people who think Trump is fighting the establishment. Now, Penny sent me the KMT of Taiwan, the government on Taiwan has visited China. That's a really important development that we've kind of overlooked it in the United States because of, everyone's thinking about the war, yeah, that's a good thing, Penny. Let's put on that video. You're following China very closely these days, Penny, and that's really important. Good. We need more people to do what you're doing, Penny. So good for you. Okay. Let me just find the place where I can download this video. Oh, is this the one that... Just waiting to download Penny's second video. That's fine. That's fine. No, not this site. Now I have to remember which of the download sites was the one that actually worked. Hold on. Got to go into the history and find out which of the sites was the one that actually worked. All right, we're going to show Penny's video from China News. Okay. This is the one that actually works. Okay. All right. Go ahead. Or no, it's not. Okay. All right. Well, that's how these things work. Okay. Penny, I'm going to have to do this video another time. It's getting late. But listen, folks, if you can send a donation to CPI, that would be awesome and appreciated. I'm going to be out of the country pretty soon, and then I'll be at the Uhuru convention to support the Uhuru movement in Missouri next weekend. And we got a lot of great stuff going on. So I'm going to put on the closing music, and we'll be back. We'll be back probably tomorrow night. Why not, right? I think tomorrow night might be the last time I stream before I'm out of town. We'll see. We'll see. I think tomorrow night is going to have to be the last time I stream before I'm out of town. So, all right. Good night.
New upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today.